What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Clint back for the Diehard MMA podcast. This is odds.com. This is Monday night. We are wearing the lucky shirt. We're coming off of another win. Couldn't be more excited to talk some UFC MMA action. How's everybody doing this evening? The chat is already up and popping. 93 live viewers. How is everybody doing? We've got John Darvel. We've got Wrestle 1993. Andrew Hansen. Creo K. Bro, some dad making his return to the chat. The Gaming Wolf 87, Mystic Sosa, Sever 333. Those are all backwards, so I'm not sure how to pronounce those. Jacksonville Zoe, my man. What's up, buddy? Welcome to the chat today. And we've got more pouring in. The man James Lynch himself tuning in the chat. If y'all don't know, we got special guest James Lynch coming on the show. Let's bring my guy in without any further ado. James, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, man. You know, I love doing this show. So happy to be back. You got such a good audience as well. So I'm excited, man. This is a great card and happy to break it down with you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. You're one of our absolute favorite guests to have on the show. You bring a totally different perspective and knowledge base, and those little nuggets of inside information from the interviews with the fighters. It's fantastic for the betting public. So we love having you, and you just bring that good positive energy and good vibes that all of us get behind here on the podcast. So it's a pleasure to have you. And yeah, man, Buffo on the beat saying the clinch back in full action here today. How was your weekend?
Weekend was great. Really good card on Saturday, obviously. Good time enjoying that. You know, John Cohen, I did the live stream with Ryan Galloway. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, just no complaints, man. What an epic card that was on Saturday night.
Heck yeah, it was, man. Like, that's one I try to tell people all the time. Everyone's so disappointed with the lack of name value and stuff like that on these UFC cards. Those are the best cards. Like, anytime you get these people that are scrapping and clawing, trying to get their way to the top, that's when you get great action, great fights. And honestly, this weekend's card is kind of built up to be the same. There's a lot of people that I think the casual fans are not going to recognize. The public is not going to notice. And I feel like that gives us some explosive opportunities for Saturday.
I agree. And there's a lot of fights on this card. Like, I broke this card down yesterday and I just couldn't believe, like, I guess because of COVID rescheduling, a lot of different things, there's just a ton of fights on here, but there's a lot of good fights too. Like, I know you're not getting those, you know, the big names or whatever, but I think some of the matchups that we're going to be going through here tonight, very interesting in my opinion.
Really good matchmaking in my opinion. So real quick, just for the people tuning in, I want to do a quick recap of the betting action for last week. If you tailed me, we ended up profiting over 8.69 units on the evening. We had a little bit of an up and down swing. Unfortunately, a couple of our dogs didn't get through. Barber, that was disappointing. Maybe shouldn't have gone so deep on her. Same thing with Gilbert Burns. I shouldn't have done 2 units on him. I was fine with the 1 unit play. He put up an absolute war against Usman. Fantastic main event fight. And the plus 225, the way he had him hurt in the first round, I'm fine with losing that ticket. We got Anthony Fluffy Hernandez coming in at plus 350. The Mallory Martin under 2.5 at plus 195. That was a nice little casher to kick the evening off. And then really what saved our bacon was the submission special. James, we parlayed Polyana by submission at plus 450 with Marquez by submission at plus 750. That came out to 45-1, and just with a little sprinkle on it, netted a good 11 units profit on that one little parlay alone.
I saw that. Good call. I actually picked Polyana as well in that fight. I was surprised to see her as the underdog. I didn't think it would be a quick finish like that. I figured it probably would end inside the distance, but good on her and good on you, man. That's why I love following you as well. You find those little, you know, props or some, you know, significant little stats there. We were talking about Fluffy Hernandez. People don't know this, just in the DMs leading up to that fight. I was kind of giving you some tidbits as well because I do the podcast with his coach. So, I mean, that's cool. That's what's so fun about doing this, is finding those things that you might not find from other people, or just things in the fight or props or whatever. I mean, that's what makes it so exciting, right?
Absolutely. And man, I got it. Just for the people who are watching this, you know, there's 165 of you live. First off, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. Do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe here to Odds HQ if you haven't already. We go live every single Monday night for the podcast like this to break down the next week's event. What I do here is we break down the podcast early. We break down the card way sooner than most people get out there. It's Monday. A lot of other podcasters don't get out on the scene until Wednesday, Thursday, some of them Friday. So because of that, a lot of my opinions and things I say are subject to change. I'm going to give you what I think now. If I have a very strong opinion or a bet that I've already locked in, I will tell you tonight. But a lot of times, I don't cement those plays until a little later in the week, which is why you got to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Diehard MMA Pod. I caught a lot of heat from people, both on YouTube and on Twitter, telling me that I was making up plays or adding things to my record. You got to follow the tweets. I know last week's show, I may have said, yeah, I'm kind of iffy on it, but before the fights on Saturday, I will tweet it if it's a bet that I have made. So, just because I say on Monday it's a pass, if I decide by Wednesday or Thursday it's something I want to pull the trigger on, don't hold it against me. I'm tweeting it out, so you got to follow me there.
Yeah, and a lot of negativity out there, and you are going to find that, especially when it comes to betting. I get that. I get told that a lot as well. But the key thing is, again, you're being transparent. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You talk about your losses. A lot of people don't do that, and I like the transparency and the honesty there, and I think that's why you're going to have a loyal following for a while, is because people can expect that. No one's going to be satisfied, Clint, no matter what, because people are going to be upset. You did pick those good bets, and they're going to come after you. It's the reality of it. But you handle it very well, my man.
Well, thank you, James. You can't make everybody happy, and I understand that. I let the haters roll off. I don't like to give them the time of day. But if there is somebody out there who's legitimately interested in the show, who's legitimately trying to tail the picks, and let's say Anthony Hernandez, for example, I made that play on Saturday morning. So if they aren't following me on Twitter, and now they're wondering why I hit a plus 350 and they didn't, I want them to know where to find that information. A couple people in the chat asking if I'm on Instagram. I am also on Instagram. I am far more active on Twitter, but I do try to post my pick selections on Instagram. I make sure they're up there by Saturday just before fight time. So if you use Instagram, go ahead and follow me there as well. That's plenty of ado. We've gotten through the red tape. We've said what's up to the chat. We've even acknowledged the shortcomings and the haters. Let's talk about some freaking fights, James. We are kicking off the night. Actually, you know what? I'm not sure where this fight goes in the order, so I want to just preface that. One that was added late to the card, Rafael Alves and Pat Sabatini. Now, I always put the ones that are, late notice additions at the bottom of my page just so I make sure I don't forget to hit them later, because I try to go in the order of the card. Not sure where this one lands, but it's a featherweight fight. Rafael Alves 19-9. Pat Sabatini comes in here 13-3. And Rafael is a guy that I attempted to fade in his Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series fight. This guy is in ridiculous shape. He's crazy explosive, wild striking, spinning attacks. He's got that fight-ending power. He can catch somebody and put them out at any point in time throughout the night. And that's something that just never fails to bail him out sometimes. He's also pretty good at jiu-jitsu. He's got a tight squeeze on him, but he has 6 losses by submission. It's one of those things where if he slows down, if he gasses out and he's facing someone that's got those grappling chops, that's where he tends to struggle. And that's why I tried to get on the other side of him and fade the hype while he was on the Contender Series. Pat, on the flip side of this thing, comes to the UFC, making his debut from the Cage Fury Fighting Championship. He was the champion over there before making the move here. And he's pretty aggressive. He likes to come forward. He switches his stance, so you never know where the attacks are coming from. He's got fast, heavy hands, good leg kicks, and a big power right hand. His timing on his level changes, I think, is the thing that stood out to me the most, though. Really strong wrestler, really strong grappler, BJJ black belt. He likes to attack with front chokes, Kimuras, and he's got 9 wins himself by submission. So this is kind of the perfect storm of the guy that I would look to fade Rafael Alves with. The only problem is I'm not sure if he's UFC caliber yet. I don't know if I want to just line up to fade Alves here. He's fought some decent competition, but nothing to write home about. Do you have any feel or any read on this card? How do you like this one?
This is another one. Well, I shouldn't say another one. This is the first fight we're breaking down, but this is one of those fights that I looked at the other day. And by the way, the order has flipped, because when I broke down this card, I agree with you. They have this as the first fight of the night now in Topology. Yesterday when I was on here, I forget which fight it was. I think it was Drakkar Klose and Luis Pena they had as the first fight. So they switched things around. I'm sure it is this fight. But to answer your question, this is one I had a tougher read on. Both are going to be making their debut. Obviously, Alves, coming off Contender Series. Sabatini's a guy I've heard about for a while. And one of the things I will say is Cage Fury fighting championships. That's one of the better regional promotions out there. You know, you're not getting any easy fights. And for the most part, Pat Sabatini has been a guy that I was expecting to make the UFC at some point. You look at his losses, right? The James Gonzalez fight, that was an arm injury loss. So, you know, can't look too much at that. The fight with Jose Mariscal, who, by the way, is a former training partner of TJ Dillashaw, was a split decision loss. So that's one that could have gone either way. In general, this is a guy that's done quite well. His third pro fight, he lost to Robert Watley. Watley, if you look at his record, pretty outstanding. What I'm looking at here when I look at Sabatini is a guy who has been battle tested. And when you've got 16 fights, there's one fighter on the card I'm going to talk about a little bit later who I'm like, I don't know how they're in the UFC, but you know, in terms of experience. But Pat Sabatini, 16 fights and getting signed to the UFC as a prospect, that's a good look there. And you're fighting someone in Alves who's one of two fighters, I think, from MMA Masters on this card. That's where he trains. Danny Chavez being the other one. And you look at the two fighters here. I mean, both of them like to finish, right? You saw you know, a finish with the guillotine choke for Alves on Contender Series. The fight before that was a knockout. The fight before that was a submission win. Pat Sabatini, same sort of thing. He's a finisher as well. So this is one of those cases where the fight looks so close on paper that I would almost, you know, give a slight edge from a betting perspective to the dog, depending on how the odds shake out here. I'm seeing the line right now at Pat Sabatini about plus 165. I think there's some value there. I'm going to pick Alves just because, you know, again, we have sort of more to look at in terms of the paper, in terms of seeing, you know, what he can bring to the table. I think Alves would get a slight edge there, but this is one of those fights where when it's so close, I would almost lean the dog in the case if you're going to bet it. So I would say bet Sabatini, but Alves will be my pick in this one.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing is you guys know me. I'm a value hunter. If there's a wide line, I want to take the dog. I always want to get on the side of the value. And I'm looking hard at Pat Sabatini, but I hate betting UFC debutantes. I hate betting people who are taking that very first step up into competition and into the UFC realm. It's not something I'm a fan of backing. So on this one, it's probably going to end up being a fireball and popcorn fight where we just sit back, get a drink, get a snack, enjoy this one. It should be an intense, high-paced fight, and I'm going to enjoy it. But I'm probably not going to pull that trigger just because that's something I am trying to be a little bit more disciplined on this year. So I like that we kind of agree there, James, and I just don't want to be caught with my pants down and have Rafael Alves get me again.
Absolutely. No, and you bring up a good point. Everyone's different when it comes to making their UFC debut. Some of them can handle the bright lights, some can't. We've seen some really bad performances. Actually, someone that I just interviewed recently, Sabina Mazo, just brought me to her debut. Remember, she had a lot of hype going in, fought Marina Moroz, ended up losing pretty badly in that one. And that's someone that had a lot of good fights on the regional scene. So you never know, right? And I think that's a good sort of error of, you know, sort of word of caution when it comes to betting two UFC debutantes in this case.
Yeah, exactly. It just complete stay away. We gotta see what these guys have. See what they bring to the table. Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Let's move along to the scheduled fights that we've going on here. I believe the first one that we've got lined up is a heavyweight tilt between Sergey Spivak and Jared Vanderaa. This one was scheduled a little while ago. It got derailed. They're gonna go ahead and get this thing going again here. Sergey's 11-2. Jared is 11-4. Sergey's got the UFC caliber experience already. He's proven he belongs in there. He knows what he's doing. Training with Francis Ngannou, it looks like at this point. Very tight boxing, nice jab. He's a decent grappler. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. But the thing I noticed about Sergey is when he can't control the grappling, that's when he struggles. If he's the better grappler of the two guys fighting in the cage, that's when he really dominates because he can pick whether he wants to fight on the feet or on the floor. That affords him some flexibility, and he does really well. But when he can't decide if he's going to be the man on the floor or not, that leaves him with just one option, and he tends to falter. He's still a young guy, still growing, still improving. So I think Sergey Spivak has a lot of upside. It's just a matter of whether or not Jared is on his level yet. This guy's a BJJ brown belt, so from a pure jiu-jitsu standpoint, he's going to be the better grappler. He came off of Dana White's Contender Series, and this is a decent jumping in spot in the UFC, in my opinion. He's kind of slow and plodding, though, and that's something that on the feet I think Sergey can take advantage of. He does have a sneaky head kick. He's very, very hittable, though. The big thing is he's a big power takedown kind of guy. He's got a strong body lock, a heavy top game, and if he gets you on the floor, he will absolutely ground and pound you. When they first set this fight up, I immediately thought Sergey Spivak. I wanted to jump on this guy. I'm not sold on Jared, but then I started looking into that grappling advantage that I talked about, and I almost feel like this is another dogger pass situation. Right now, we've got Sergey Spivak. Let me find him here. There's so many dang fights this week, James, that I'm having trouble looking at.
-240 is what I'm seeing. Yeah,
there you go. -240. Yeah. Comeback is plus 200 on Jared Vanderaa.
Exactly.
And like I said, heavyweights, man, if you've got two very close, tight heavyweights, they're near each other's level. I always say to take the dog, because heavyweights, you can end the fight with just one shot. That's all it takes. It adds a little bit of extra oomph if you're getting some plus on the money side. And I feel like if Jared can get this fight to the floor, he's going to be levels above Sergey. How do you feel about this one, James?
Yeah, I kind of had the same read. I remember when the fight was first booked, I believe it was for December before all the COVID stuff. I was really heavy on Spivak as well. And I just, you look at the UFC experience, you sort of feel that, hey, this guy's a little bit more established. But Jared's had kind of a weird career trajectory in a way. It was a couple fights into his career. He fought Richard Odoms for the LFA heavyweight title. So right then they were already trying to determine if this guy was sort of the real deal. He ended up getting submitted in that fight in the 5th round against a guy in Richard Odoms who was like in his 40s. So it was kind of a setback for him. He went over to, he fought a few more times for LFA. Didn't work out, went over to EFC, had a couple good fights, including a win over Ruan Potts, the UFC vet. And then he's come back and he's looked pretty good. I mean, the Contender Series fight was quick work, got that TKO finish over one of the best names in MMA, Harry Hunsucker. But in general, this is a guy that trains with a lot of really good fighters. He's at Team Quest, getting to train with Sam Alvey and Dominic Reyes and a lot of those big, heavy guys from that camp. So I like that from that perspective in terms of who he's getting to work with. Like you mentioned, Spivak getting to work with guys like Francis Ngannou. So it is a little bit interesting. Vanderaa does get hit a lot, though. I have noticed that in a couple of his fights. And even though he's got good stand-up power as well, I do wonder, getting that step up, fighting a guy in Spivak, how it's going to go. The way I look at this matchmaking, Clint, is the UFC is trying to determine who the better prospect is. You don't typically see guys who are in there, especially in the heavyweight division. I mean, how many 20-year-olds, 28-year-olds in their case, are they trying to push? Like, there's just barely any. So they're really trying to determine who sort of fits here. This could be a trap, like you were kind of saying. Like, I feel like Vanderaa, even though he's a big underdog here, I feel like he could go out there and potentially pull off the upset, especially at heavyweight where anything can happen. I'm gonna lead Sergey Spivak though, just because of that UFC experience. I think that what we've seen from him is a bit of an evolution. I know the Walt Harris fight is very fresh in my mind of him getting finished in that one, and I could see Vanderaa doing something similar there. But I just like the fact that Spivak is like I said, a little bit more battle tested in the octagon, and it's not his debut, right? That's one thing with Vanderaa. He's going to be making his promotional debut. So we'll see what happens there. Did happen to interview Jared before this fight. You guys can find that on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LynchOnSports. It's under the UFC Vegas 19 playlist. I did 18 interviews for this card, Clint. So you guys got plenty of content to check out once you're done here. But yeah, I give a slight lean to Spivak in that sense, just because of the experience. I think I can't see Vanderaa going out there and submitting, Sergey Spivak, but I can see Spivak either submitting Vanderaa or winning a decision here. But I like Spivak a little bit more in this fight.
Okay. Yeah, I can totally understand the angle. Absolutely something that I understand. It just, for me, I know a lot of people are going to look to parlay Sergey. Please don't. This fight is going to play out razor close, in my opinion. I feel like the size difference, Jared being just such a bigger man, and the fact that he's capable of getting someone like Sergey who doesn't mind being on his back, playing the jiu-jitsu game to the floor, this is going to be a fight that the bigger man might just be able to bully the smaller one, regardless of that, UFC caliber experience. I feel like the line is wide. Whether or not I decide to break that rule of no debutantes and take the shot on Jared Vanderaa, that'll depend. Follow me on Twitter to find out. Maybe later this week I end up making that play, especially if money keeps on pouring in here on Sergey Spivak. If that line gets out of hand, y'all know me, that's when I snipe. I have no problem standing against the market and taking the side of the dog that everyone counts out. In fact, that's been kind of the number one thing that's been working for me so far in 2021, is finding those spots where the world has counted somebody out entirely and then hitting them because it's a 50-50 opportunity, and we're getting plus 200 on one side.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a tough fight, but like I said, you can see what the UFC is doing here. They want to figure out who the better heavyweight is. And I saw someone in the chat, and I kind of agree with them, saying that, the UFC needs heavyweights. So that's also a reason I think Vanderaa got the Contender Series shot. He's getting this opportunity. He has enough fights to be in the UFC, but is he UFC caliber? That's another question. We're going to find that out on Saturday.
That is exactly the question. But again, James, I got to go back to the grappling. Marcin Tybura was able to just out-muscle Sergey Spivak. And I know there's an experience difference there. Don't get it twisted. I know there's a huge experience difference between Jared Vanderaa and Marcin Tybura, but Jared can follow that same exact plan. Jared, we're in the small cage. We're in the apex. This guy doesn't have to worry about being in space. If he gets in and he's able to take a couple shots from Spivak, who's not a power puncher, this guy is not going to put your lights out with a single bomb. Vanderaa, who's never shown to be chinny, never been knocked out, he might be able to just walk through a couple of jabs, pin him up against the fence, drag him to the floor, and that's what I'm talking about. That's my path here. So, yeah, yikes. I'm just not going to lay the wood. Sergey may get this one done, but yeah, this one should be fun. It's going to be heavyweight slobber knockers are always a good time, James.
Certainly are. Yeah, and second fight of the night should be good. Absolutely.
All right. We've got a couple of them this week. We're going from big to little here, though. Next fight up on the card is a bantamweight fight. Aiemann Zahabi taking on Drako Rodriguez. And James, if you want to know something really fun, little tidbit here. You and I broke this fight down back on December 16th of 2020.
We're going to sound like a bunch of parrots here, but hey, it's another victim of the COVID, right? As I said.
Absolutely. Yeah, so those of you who have been watching the show for a while, James and I did a show back in December, and this fight was on that card. We absolutely talked about it, and I'm going to say the same exact things. Aiemann Zahabi, 7-2. He's in the UFC because of that last name. He's well-rounded. He's good everywhere. I just don't think he's exceptional anywhere, and I don't know that he's necessarily UFC level. He's also a little older to be, making giant improvements that he'll be able to stand out with and things like that. He's got accurate striking, a nice jab, but he's low volume. That's the thing, is he can get out volumed by people. He does have strong takedown defense. He does have a good body lock. He scrambles well. He's a BJJ brown belt. I just feel like he was rushed to the UFC because of that last name, and I don't know if he belongs here. Drako Rodriguez, physically strong, big power. He's got a sneaky good ground game, and he's got 10 amateur fights. So even though he's only 7-1, he's got more experience than we really consider him to have when it comes to fighting. This is a spot where I just don't want to lay the kind of chalk on Drako Rodriguez here. He's so hyped up coming into the UFC, and everyone's opinion of Zahabi is so low. I feel like, once again, maybe it's too wide of a line. I may not be able to make a move on this one, James. What are you feeling here?
Kind of like we talked about last time, and this is a case of actually two fighters who have not fought great competition. I mean, you look at Zahabi, there's a couple fights into his career, he's fought like one opponent, Kyle Oliveira, who has a winning record, and he was 3-1 at the time, right? So the last name definitely played a role in him coming in. The other thing is the layoff. Like, he hasn't fought since that UFC Ottawa card back in May of 2019. Is he going to come back and Brian Ortega us and show a completely different fighter? Maybe. I mean, I can't answer that honestly, but typically, if you look at fighters that are a bit older, coming off a big layoff, they tend not to perform too well. I don't have any data in front of me to suggest that, but that's just kind of what you see, unless your name's Dominic Cruz, right? And that Vince Morales fight, I remember watching that being like, how is he losing to Vince Morales? I like Vince, great guy, but that's a fight I thought Zahabi should have won, and he got dominated in that fight. So I can't trust him at this point, although this does look like a spot where, like you said, Drako has all the hype right now, nice winning streak, a lot more active, a lot of finishes, but how is he going to do in that debut? I mean, that's the big question here. So this is one I will actually kind of stay away from. I'm going to pick Rodriguez just because I have to. He's younger. He's got, like I said, momentum's a big thing. I just don't think Zahabi at this point is UFC caliber, but I want to warn people because typically when fighters have a layoff, you don't know what you're going to get when they come back. He could have been working on a number of things while he's been away. I know he became a dad. Maybe we're going to see that like dad Cerrone thing with Zahabi in this fight. I have no idea, but this looks like a big trap to me, and I would not feel confident picking either guy. But if I'm going to side with someone, it's Drako Rodriguez in this fight.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I feel like it's favorite or pass rather than dog or pass, but I don't want to lay that chalk again on a guy that's just not proven at the UFC level. My boy Buffo on the beat here has a look at the over, and that may not be a bad spot because if anything, Aiemann Zahabi is defensively sound, so that might just be the way to go. And remember, everybody, this is a sports betting podcast. We're talking about trying to place bets, find opportunities to cash a couple of tickets. So if we're not super excited about a certain pick or spot, or we say, this is my pick, that's the fighter I'm going with, it's because we're not super excited about it and we don't feel like there's an opportunity to place cash and actually have a betting spot here. So sorry if that's what you came for. If you just came for a guy to be like, fighter A, fighter B, fighter C, you're on the wrong show. We still appreciate you hanging out. We've got 316 live viewers. Thank you all so much for spending your Monday evening here with us tonight. My name is Clint. This is the Diehard MMA podcast, joined by one of my absolute favorite guests in the world, Mr. James Lynch. This is odds.com. Smash that like button. Do us a favor and, subscribe if you haven't. It's the least you could do to hit the like button. We bring all this free content. We're semi-entertaining. He looks good. I'm kind of fugly, but hit the like button anyway. Let's move on. We've got the next fight coming up here. A featherweight fight between Chaz the Scrapper Skelly, a fan favorite, and Jamall Emmers. Now, James, I've taken the first three. I'm going to go ahead and lead with you here on this one. How does this fight, size up for you?
Well, first, let's look at the odds on this one. Jamall Emmers is the favorite in this fight. I just got to bring it up here. What do we got? Jamall Emmers about a minus 240 favorite. The comeback on Chaz Skelly plus 200. That's how I see this fight as well. A couple things with this fight. Had a chance to speak to both fighters before this one, so got some good insight in terms of what they're dealing with. Chaz Skelly has not fought since September of 2019. That's when he beat Jordan Griffin at UFC Vancouver. I was at that fight. I actually went out for drinks with Chaz after the fight, so I really got to kind of get some insight with him or whatever. I mean, I'm not trying to cross that line of being unprofessional or whatever. I just happened to be at the hotel after the fact, and there was a bunch of fighters there. It was sort of like the Victory Hotel thing. But you remember that Jordan Griffin fight? I mean, that was a fight where Griffin actually looked pretty good early on, but Skelly was able to survive some of those submission attempts and ended up winning a decision in that fight. So while Skelly did get the win, it was one of those fights where Griffin, I think, had an opportunity to win that fight and he didn't capitalize. So now fast forward to February 2021. That's when this fight is. Skelly has not fought since then. Skelly was supposed to fight Grant Dawson twice last year. Skelly ended up getting injured, I think, the second time. The first time, I can't remember what the issue was. It was something to do with Dawson. It was an issue he had to withdraw. The second one was an injury. I didn't know what that injury was at the time, but I asked him in the interview after, because he was kind of, I believe I spoke to him right after the injury had happened. I said, hey, what's the deal? And he was kind of being secretive about it, but he told me now it was a shoulder injury. So he had to actually get surgery on that. So he's coming off surgery, which is a bit of a red flag. Another red flag is that he's 35, right? So that's another thing to kind of consider here, is that you've got a guy who's got a layoff, he's coming off surgery, and he's a bit older. But Chaz Skelly, we know, comes from a great camp. One of a few fighters on this card from Sanford MMA. That you're getting, sometimes the training camp's as tough as the fight, right? With some of the guys they get to train with over there. So Skelly's definitely in good hands in terms of where he's working. Being at Sanford MMA, I think that's a great move. Now, Jamall Emmers, I think is very underrated. 31 years old, comes into this one off the win over Vince Cachero in a fight that, I mean, that's about as close to a beatdown as you can get. And granted, Vince Cachero, tough as nails. I know he's fighting in a couple weeks. All the props to him, but that was a total beatdown from Jamall Emmers. And the fight before that, he lost that split to Giga Chikadze, which I think could have gone either way. I think
that looks good in hindsight, man. Giga's been on a roll.
He has. And I think people forget as well with Jamall Emmers, he has win over Corey Sandhagen. I know it's a different weight class, but if you go back, that was a featherweight fight. That looks like a good win now. So I think Emmers is a guy that's always been sort of, he had his opportunity on Contender Series a couple of years ago against Julian Erosa, absolutely blew it. He got knocked out in the second round by Julian Erosa in that fight. But again, he's a guy that went back, fixed some things. And actually for this camp, he's been working at MMA Gold, which is, full disclosure, I do a podcast with MMA Gold's head coach, Jim West. So I know he's been telling me about what Jamall's been doing. Jamall's sort of been cross-training throughout his career, but he spent a good chunk of his camp at MMA Gold, which I think is a good move. We saw, some of the adjustments that Anthony Hernandez made last week in his fight, getting that big win. So I like the fact that Emmers is over there as well. So kind of what I'm looking at here is, I think this is Emmers' fight to lose. I think it's a good name, good opportunity for him to go out there and capitalize. He's got, really good stand-up, good submissions as well. I think we could see a finish here with Jamall Emmers. So, the line right now, like I said, a little bit steep in terms of it being, what do we got here? Minus 240, almost 3-1 odds there. Jamall Emmers inside the distance right now is plus 225. I think that's worth a stab. We've seen Chaz Skelly finish before. Remember when he fought, I think it was Jason Knight, or he lost in the third round in that fight. I think, again, I think Emmers, doesn't want to leave it in the hands of the judges like we saw in the Giga Chikadze
after the
fight.
last one, you'd think so.
Exactly. So I think it's possible to see a finish here. So I may put a little sprinkle on that, but I'm pretty confident Jamall Emmers gets it done. I know Skelly's been around there. I know he's been in the octagon a long time, but Emmers, I think this is a good opportunity for him to really show the division that he's the real deal. So I'm taking Jamall Emmers in this fight.
I like the way you're thinking here, James, and it's unfortunate because Chaz Skelly, like I said, he's kind of a fan favorite. He's a sports bettor. He jumps on, Twitter and talks about the bets he's laying down. He bets on other fighters.
His Twitter got hacked, right? Did you hear that whole story?
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't hear about that.
His Twitter's gone. Someone had hacked his account. They unfollowed everyone, and it's unfortunate. So I think Chaz basically said he's just going to be using Instagram. I don't think he's going to try and start up his Twitter anymore. But I agree, because I loved having him on Twitter. We used to talk bets all the time.
It's always really fun to connect with fighters like that. That's unfortunate. That makes me sad. But he's the big thing for him is his submission offense. He's a great grappler. He's unorthodox on the feet. He's a little weird. He's got that human backpack thing going on. If he gets to your back, you're in trouble. You do not want him to be there. But he's a submission over position type of guy. He'll dive on something that's not quite there yet, looking for the finish. And sometimes that puts him in bad positions. You mentioned the surgery. You mentioned the layoff. Man, he fought once in 2018. once in 2019, and he didn't fight at all in 2020. The inactivity is a huge, huge red flag for me, especially when you've got a guy that's getting ever so closer to that ripe old age of 40 that we absolutely love to start fading once they get there. He's a little long in the tooth given the circumstances, and I'm not a huge fan. Jamall Emmers being tall the way he is, long the way he is, his striking is ever improving, and let's not forget, he's a good wrestler. That was always the thing everyone talked about, myself included, leading up to that Giga Chikadze fight was take him down. He was going to just dominate Giga if he mixed in the takedowns, but he chose to stand with a world-class striker, and he went to a split decision. In hindsight, that's an excellent loss. I mean, this kid is up and coming. He's putting it together. He's got great timing on his level changes, and he's got smothering top control. I talk about it on the podcast as often as I can. When you get a solid jiu-jitsu artist and a solid wrestler, you got to give the edge to the wrestler, because when the wrestler gets just that little bit of submission defense under their belt, they're impossible to tap. Trust me, from personal experience, I can tell you, there's nothing worse than a defensively sound wrestler on top of you in jiu-jitsu. So I can see Chaz Skelly getting stuck on bottom here and just being grinded on by Jamall for 15. And, like you said, that finish is always within striking distance for a guy like Emmers with how athletic and explosive he is. He's got nasty low kicks, too. He's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage here. I feel like Jamall Emmers is the play. This is one of those ones where I'm tempted to lay the wood. Minus 240 is a big price tag, but I feel like he's very much worth it. So if you're looking for a parlay piece, I don't mind him there, but just keep in mind that Chaz Skelly can tap pretty much anybody, so there's always that chance you can end up on the wrong side. But I like Jamall Emmers here a lot, man.
Yeah, I do as well. We'll see. Again, Skelly might show us something we haven't seen before, but I just feel really comfortable with Emmers here. Just having followed his career, I think the upside here is on him. And we'll see how this one unfolds.
Yeah, we'll see. These old veterans always spring that upset, right? Every once in a while, they'll come out and just show everybody that they're still around. So that's absolutely here and on the table, but I'm not seeing it. I think this is an Emmers spot. And hey, I just want to take this opportunity to pull my soapbox out here. NJ81, been a little bit of a hater in the chat today. That's okay. We don't ban people for being haters. You're entitled to your opinion. Asking how much do you lay? Everyone's an expert, but nobody shows their bet slips. Here's the thing, NJ81. The reason we don't worry about that is because it doesn't matter. It's like asking somebody how much they get paid for their salary. At the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. If I told people I only bet $10 and I do this podcast, I bet $10 a fight, no one's going to tune in and listen because they're just going to automatically assume that I'm a scrub. If I tell everybody I bet $1,000 a fight, all of a sudden people's ears are perked up. This guy's a high roller. He knows his shit. He knows what he's talking about, and I'm going to do everything he says. That's also not true. So because of that, we use units. We go by units because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money I'm comfortable putting on a bet. It matters how much you're comfortable putting on a bet. Everyone bets different amounts. Everyone needs to bet within their means. And at the end of the year, if I've given out a positive record and you've tailed me and you've made money on my reads and my bets, it shouldn't matter how much I made. You made money at the end of the day listening to my knowledge and opinion. So that's why we just simply don't worry about it. Moving on to the next fight tonight, we've got women's flyweight Shana Dobson making her glorious return to the UFC cage, taking on UFC newcomer Casey O'Neill. And this one is super intriguing to me. Dobson is 4-4. Casey O'Neill is 5-0, undefeated. Now, Shana's been training at Team Elevation. That's a team we've been talking about for a long, long time. They are absolutely on a roll right now, and I love what they bring to the table. She's improving every single time she gets in there, and she is mean. Like, she's the type of fighter that you know is going to work for your money if you back her. She fires hard, straight punches down, right down the pipe. She's got a good front kick that she uses to control the distance, and she's very physically strong with a good gas tank. You may remember Shana Dobson pulling the biggest upset of 2020 against Maria Agapova. And the big question surrounding that is, did Maria Agapova mess up? Or is Shana Dobson that good? That's what we've got to analyze here. And it's somewhere in the middle, but my idea for this is that Maria Agapova came out and expected to walk through her opponent. She disrespected the skill set of Shana Dobson, and she gassed herself out. If she had not done that, if she had respected her opponent and taken her time in that fight, I think Maria Agapova wins that fight 8 times out of 10. So it was a mistake on Agapova's part, but it gave Dobson some shine. And here comes Casey O'Neill She fights out of Tiger Muay Thai, which is maybe the best MMA gym on the planet. Solid boxing, good defense, good offense, nasty submission attacks. She creates awkward positions and scrambles that a lot of people just aren't going to know what to do with. Really strong hips. And she's got a nasty Kimura to armbar transition that she loves to hit and work people over with. She's got a 7-fight amateur career as well. So kind of like we talked about before, even though she's only got 5 pro fights, you got to factor in the fact that she's had a long and successful amateur career as well. James, which way are you leaning on this one, man?
This is a tough one. I'll be honest. I did interview both fighters before this one. Again, check out the playlist on the channel. I actually pin on Twitter at the top all my interviews so you guys can see, who I've spoken with. So I have some insight into both. So let's start with Shana Dobson first. I agree with you. Her going to Elevation Fight Team was a career changer, in my opinion, for her to go to a camp where it's more structured. She can work with a lot of women. Rose Namajunas is there now. She's getting some work with Rose, Montana De La Rosa, Mallory Martin, who I know had some issues last week, ended up losing that fight. She's getting to train with a lot of women as well. Claire Guthrie as well, who's from LFA. She trains there on top of that. So she's getting top-notch training. Dobson's got a lot of experience here. Obviously 8 fights in her career compared to just 5 here for Casey O'Neill. And it's not just the fact that they've been in the UFC. She's also competed on The Ultimate Fighter as well. That's a lot of experience that Casey O'Neill does not have. This does look like a spot where Dobson could potentially pull up the upset again. And I agree. Like, we don't know what happened in that last fight. Was it Agapova having an adrenaline dump? Was it a case of that, Dobson, showed her experience in that fight? We really don't know. But I do warn people in this fight, because you know what the UFC is doing here. First off, let's talk about the optics of this fight. Okay. How often do you see a fighter with just 5 fights signed to the UFC? It's very rare, right? Like, usually someone who has 5 fights, they go on the Contender Series and then they get on the UFC, right? That's usually how it works. But O'Neill was outright signed. So the UFC must know something about her that, maybe we don't, or something, right? And you mentioned the gym, Tiger Muay Thai, great striking gym, although she didn't train there for this camp. I'll talk about that in a second. But you can kind of see here, Dobson's sort of, at this point in her career, been fed to prospects over and over. Agapova, before that it was Sabina Mazo, before that was Lauren Mueller, right? Like, you can see what the UFC is trying to do. They're trying to just get these prospects to make a name off Shana Dobson. But I think that
she
can
keeps
almost
hanging in there.
Exactly. But I almost think that works against, some of her opponents, because, she's pissed off. I talked to her in the interview. I said, what did you think of Agapova, the lead up to the fight? She's like, it was BS. Brett Okamoto's doing an interview with Agapova. You think Shana Dobson's getting an interview before that fight? Of course not, because everyone was on Agapova in that fight. It was like boxing odds in that fight. If I remember, she was like almost like a -1,000 in that one. So I bring all that up because I do think, if you look at this on paper, if this does stay standing, I think Casey O'Neill wins this fight. But I do worry a bit, just because O'Neill's never fought in the UFC. Yes, she's fought in Eternal MMA and UAE Warriors, which are 2 solid promotions on the regional scene. But I'm also looking at the opponents here. She's got, 2-0, 0-0, 1-1. Yes, she has a lot of amateur experience as well, but that doesn't compare to octagon time. It really doesn't. And I think that's something to just keep in mind for this fight. Now, I mentioned it there. She didn't train at Tiger Muay Thai for this camp because the pandemic's going on. So a lot of the fighters that train at that gym can't train there right now. That's why Piotr Jan's at American Top Team right now. Casey O'Neill is in Vegas. She's been in Vegas since the holidays. She actually spent the holidays in Vegas. I spoke to her again. You guys can watch the interview up there. By the way, I misspoke on my show yesterday. I said Syndicate MMA. She's actually at Extreme Couture, but you get the idea. She's in Vegas. She's getting to use the PI. She's getting to take advantage of everything there. And there's a lot of women training partners she gets to work with as well. But like you said, Clint, Tiger Muay Thai, one of the best, gyms in the sport. Her striking's got to be on point. And we've seen that, a lot of finishes, right? So kind of the way I look at this fight is that if it stays standing, Casey O'Neill is going to win this fight. But I do warn people that I don't think it's a slam dunk. You've got, like we talked about, the UFC debut. We've got the experience for Dobson. We've got Dobson training at a good camp. And not only just, getting good training, but the mental side of it as well. I don't think a lot of people know this, but Elliot Marshall, who's one of the coaches there, UFC vet, he does a lot of mental visualization work with his fighters. Montana De La Rosa spoke to me about this when we did our interview, and she talked about how much it's helped her just sort of, put your mind in the right spot when you're going in there. And I know Shana is someone as well who uses that on top of that. So I'm just saying, I think we could potentially see an upset here as well. I know on paper it looks like O'Neill's going to win, and obviously the UFC does as well, but I'm going to pick O'Neill. But I'm just warning you guys, I do think there is value on Dobson here just with their experience. I think that's something you can't ignore. And this does look like another situation where it's like, oh, she's not going to do it again, right? Because guess what, Clint? I didn't even realize this. Shana Dobson has never won back-to-back fights in her career. Can you believe that?
With only 8 fights and a 4-4 record, I kind of can believe it.
Right, but it is odd, right? How many fighters are in the UFC? I'd be willing to bet she's probably the only person on the roster who doesn't have 2 straight wins in her career. That's a crazy stat. So that's all I'm saying wild. Maybe you feel differently differently, but I feel like this is one of those spots where you got to be a little bit careful because Dobson, I do think it's a bit of, that she's good. And I think people underestimate her.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. And the only problem for me is the value is a little bit gone already. So right now, we've got Casey O'Neill minus 145, plus 125 is the other side on Shana Dobson. Dobson opened up at plus 180, and the early money came in on O'Neill. You could have got Dobson as high as plus 195. If I had gotten Dobson at plus 195, I would have smashed that spot. I absolutely would have taken the dog. But now that she is down as far as she is, I just don't know if I can pay 125 on her. I mean, first off, we talk about closing line value and getting the best of the number and all that. That's gone. That's out the window. The only side you can look at from that perspective is Casey O'Neill. Do you think she wins? Yes or no? I got a lot of questions about Casey O'Neill, and there's a lot of ways that Shana Dobson has been disappointing and a lot of ways that she lost. Submission is not one of them, James. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's really the ace up the sleeve of Casey O'Neill is her crazy grappling. And if she can't submit Shana Dobson, the wrestling and then just the sheer strength and physicality may be too much. I feel like Shana can grind her out and get her way to a 3-round decision.
Which right now, I'm looking at the odds right here. Dobson wins by decision is plus 247. Not amazing, but if you feel like Dobson's going to win, I don't think you'll see her finish Casey O'Neill. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it happens, but I think with it just being 3 rounds, O'Neill's probably watching that Agapova fight going like, I'm not going to overextend myself and think that I'm going to run this girl over. The odds are much closer in this fight, right? So I think if Dobson does win, I see it more likely a decision than a finish. Because typically Dobson, I know she does have some finish wins over Agapova and Ariel Beck, but in general, a lot of her fights do go the distance. So that's something I would sort of look at if you're going to bet Dobson anyways.
Yep. I like that we're kind of on the same page here, man. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm just rooting for Dobson. Like, that's part of this is I want to see her stick it to the UFC. I want to see her say, shove it, because you've tried to make names off of me. And now she's good enough that she's going to start kicking the asses of their prospects. Like, that'd be fun and satisfying for me. And I would be a huge fan, and getting to see her pull up a back-to-back upset. No love, no respect coming off the biggest upset of 2020. She's a big underdog again. And I'm pulling for Dobson here.
Same here. But like I said, I got to pick O'Neill just based off you can see what the UFC is doing here, right? Like, writing is on the wall. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Next fight up, we've got a featherweight fight. Nate the Train Landwehr coming back to the cage, taking on Julian Juicy J Erosa. Nice little fight name competition we've got going here. Good ones. Nate Landwehr is 14-3. Julian Erosa is 24-9. And James, I'm going to let you go ahead and kick this one off, man. Tell us what's going on.
Another fight where I interviewed both fighters. I know them both quite well. Rosa's actually originally from Washington State, which is close here. Actually, Rosa cornered a guy. I know people don't care about this, but I'm going to mention it anyways. You get a little tidbit here. But Rosa actually cornered a guy that on a card I commentated. So, and I've seen Rosa in person. I think that's the only time I've ever seen him. He's a big guy for the weight class. I don't know how he makes 145, but he's very big here. But a couple things about this fight. First off, let's talk about the odds. It's almost a pick 'em. Pretty much is a pick 'em here. So we've got right now Julian Erosa minus 115, Nate Landwehr minus 105. I'm a little surprised to see Erosa as the slight favorite. I actually would go Nate the Train on that one, and I'll explain why in a second here. But first, let's talk about these two guys. Julian Erosa, of course, big upset win in his last fight over Sean Woodson, handed him his first loss. That was a 3rd-round submission in that one. That was back in June of last year. Why has Erosa not fought since then? Well, a couple things. Had some injuries, but he got COVID, and Clint, he got COVID pretty badly. He told me, and this was actually the title of the video I had over on Pub Sports, was Julian Erosa said it took him 6 to 8 weeks for his lungs to get back. That is a bit of a red flag, I got to say, right? I mean, and granted, Landwehr got COVID as well, but that is something to think about that, COVID affects everyone differently, but if your lungs are not good, if you're not at your best 6 to 8 weeks, that's gotta impact you a little bit. And again, a bit of a layoff coming into this one as well. But again, back-to-back wins coming into this. This is his second UFC stint. If you remember, he went 0-3 the first time. Not an easy row of opponents there. Devontae Smith, Grant Dawson, Julio Arce. I mean, it doesn't get much tougher than that. So, this new and improved sort of Julian Erosa, we'll see how it goes. Height and reach-wise, they're pretty similar. There's a slight height and reach advantage here for Julian Erosa. He's 6'1" with the 74.5-inch reach. Nate Landwehr, 5'9" with the 70-inch reach. So it'll be interesting. But the thing with Nate Landwehr is, let's forget about the debut, right? Really bad UFC debut against Herbert Burns. Rebounded over a pretty good veteran in Darren Elkins in his last fight. And I think the one thing with Nate Landwehr is I don't think we've seen the best Nate so far in the octagon. I mean, the win over Elkins was great, but if you saw some of his fights in M1, and some of the competition he was fighting, guys that are, 16-4 and 18-7 and 10-1. I mean, this guy has fought good competition. He has been on the UFC's radar for a while, and they finally signed him. Obviously, like I said, things didn't go well against Herbert Burns, but I feel like he's really ready to get in there. And I think if this fight stays standing, I think Nate Landwehr can knock out Julian Erosa. Erosa has taken a lot of damage in his career. If you look at some of the losses, they aren't just like, TKO finishes. They're like, some of these are like brutal knockout finishes. The Devontae Smith one comes to mind. 46 seconds in that fight, gets knocked out in the very first round. I remember even on the regional scene, he got knocked out, in cage sport as well. So that's one thing with Nate as well. He has lost. Yes, he got finished by Herbert Burns. He's a guy that typically has not taken a ton of damage in his career. And I do think with Julian, it just takes that one shot to put him out. So, like I said, interviewed both fighters. Landwehr, didn't change anything for this camp, just stayed at home in Clarksville, Tennessee. Did his camp over there. Julian Erosa obviously had Extreme Couture training over there. I like Nate Landwehr here, as a slight dog. I think if it stays standing, I give him the edge with his power. Like I said, I don't think we've seen the best Nate Landwehr, and I think we'll see it in this fight. I'm going to pick him either by knockout or maybe he wins like a pretty decisive decision. But if you look at Nate Landwehr, I think inside the distance, you can get that for some plus money. I haven't had a look yet, but let me just have a look here. Landwehr inside the distance is plus 250. I would even look at that KO or TKO prop. I think that's likely how Nate finishes this fight, but I like Nate Landwehr in this fight. I like him a lot better than Julian Erosa.
Okay, I like it. So, James nailed a lot of these points, touched on it. Nate is he's only got one direction, and that's forward. Like this guy, the train is the perfect nickname for him. He just barrels in, looking to bully his opponents, and he hits really hard. He's also got a great gas tank. This guy never slows down. His submission defense is excellent. The only problem is he relies on his chin. Extremely hittable. One of these days, somebody's going to pop and put Nate the Train down the way that Herbert Burns did, because he just takes too much damage doing that. When he gets higher up the ranks, it's going to be an issue for him. Yeah. Now, Julian Erosa, he's coming off a big upset in his last fight. He got absolutely counted out going in there against Sean Woodson, and he survived the first 2 rounds, and then he choked Sean Woodson out late in the third, and Woodson's a big-time prospect. Everybody was high on that kid, and everybody counted out Juicy J, myself included. Like, I got to fess up to that. He's got really heavy inside leg kicks, decent boxing, good defensive grappling. He's got an offensive submission game, but he's extremely hittable, more so than Nate is. He keeps his hands down at his sides. He relies on head movement, but he gets hit all the time. The one thing that he does have that I saw as a big red flag for Nate the Train is he throws the same exact knee up the middle that Herbert Burns does. And that's the thing that put an end to the night of Nate Landwehr the last time out. I feel like Julian Erosa is the new Michael Johnson, James. He submitted a guy like Sean Woodson, but he got knocked out by Artem freaking Lobov. Like, nothing makes sense about this guy's career, what he does and what he doesn't. His highs are super high, and his lows are extremely low. He's been knocked out 4 times, and you're right. Like, I've got to just go to the side of Nate Landwehr. I feel like he's got a little bit more upside. He's got some more gas in the tank. The submission defense should be enough to avoid the submissions from Juicy J, and then the wrestling should be enough to control the fight. And like you said, he should just be better on the feet. If these guys are going to go blow for blow, we've seen one get knocked out regularly, and we've seen the other one get fluky knocked out with a knee from hell that nobody saw coming. It's not the same thing. I would be tempted to bet an under. I would be extremely tempted to just look at the under on this fight. It looks like they've got it set at 2.5, and it's a pick 'em right now. Under might be the play, because either Juicy J comes out and pulls another upset and does something to Nate that not many people have been able to do, or Nate is able to work him, and that durability kind of starts to resurface. That bad chin kind of starts to come back up, and Nate hits freaking hard. I think that knockout is definitely on the table, so I kind of lean to Nate here, but that knee up the middle really scares me for Julian Erosa. So once again, from a betting perspective, unfortunately, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to land on this one.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, like you said, Erosa, I definitely picked Sean Woodson in that fight as well. And I should be more loyal to my Pacific Northwest brethren in terms of Julian Erosa. But Nate the Train's a guy I've interviewed for a very long time. It's been interesting because he was a guy that took sort of an unconventional route to the UFC where, he went international, right? His previous management team had ties to M1. So he was over there training. And he actually, believe it or not, he has like a huge fan base in Russia. Like, they love him over there. Even when we were supposed to fight Avaliev before, if you remember, that was supposed to be the initial fight before he got COVID. He was saying that he was getting support from the Russians in that fight too, which is interesting. A little tidbit there, but yeah, we'll see. I think a good point about the knee up the middle. That is one thing I forgot to mention, but I still think Nate wins here. We'll see.
It's going to be a fun fight. This is another one that should be on your short list for fight of the night. This one's going to be highly entertaining, and I expect it to be a good one. So next fight up, we have got Eddie Wineland coming back to the cage, taking on John Sexy Mexi Castaneda. And I just have to say that fight name because it's way too fun not to. Eddie Wineland, 24-14, a UFC staple. We've seen this guy forever. And John Castaneda, UFC newcomer, 17-5. And Eddie Wineland, James, he's literally the boxing meme guy. Like, he's got the curl handlebar mustache and kind of does this. He's literally that exact guy.
He is. Really interesting matchup. You can see here what they're doing. Obviously, prospect versus up-and-comer and John Castaneda here. Eddie Wineland, didn't have a chance to speak to him before this fight. I tried. Usually I get him, but I don't know. He wasn't responding to my text. We'll see. But 36 years old, 5'7" with a 69-inch reach, taking on John Castaneda, who is 29 years old, 5'7" with a 69-inch reach. The thing that stands out right away, which is kind of an obvious thing, he barely fights, right? I mean, since basically fighting for the title, he's been sort of a one-a-year type guy, and I don't blame him. He's got a full-time job as a firefighter, as far as I know. So that's been taking up a lot of time here. But you look, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. That's the only time he's fought. He was sort of, fed to the wolves, sort of speaking, against Sean O'Malley in his last fight, fighting a much faster guy. Castaneda's not sort of, as explosive as like a Sean O'Malley is. So he doesn't have to worry about that in this fight. And obviously the edge and experience has to go to, Eddie Wineland, not even just in fights, but I mean, this is a guy who fought for the title against Henan Brown in Toronto. I was at that fight. It's just crazy to think that, this is a former title challenger now, but you almost forget about that because of how inactive he is. Now, John Castaneda had a tough debut. He had to fight Nathaniel Wood. I mean, that's, the guy's called the prospect, but he is one of the good fighters in that weight class. Had a couple losses on the regional scene prior to that. They were close fights for Combate. I believe that was part of a tournament as well. So a little bit different circumstances in terms of all that. I think we forget that Castaneda was actually on Contender Series back in 2017. Got a win over there against Chaden. Not even pronounce the last name, but pretty solid win there, but didn't get the finish. That's why he didn't get signed. So he's come back here. Now, I did have a chance to speak to Castaneda before this fight. Wasn't able to do any cross training for this one. He was back home in Minnesota doing his typical training with Greg Nelson, who, if you guys know, is sort of a staple there. But not that this matters that much, but a little tidbit. I did get to work a bit with Pat Barry and Rose Namajunas. I guess they were in town, did a little bit of work with him. So I think that's a positive sign as well. But Castaneda just kept things basic, didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything crazy. But he will have his good buddy, Dan Moret, the former UFC fighter, in his corner. They're like best friends. That's actually how Castaneda ended up training at MMA Lab a few years ago, was through Dan Moret. So, yeah, we'll see. But just based off activity, just based off upside, I got to go John Castaneda here. I'm not expecting a finish. I mean, Eddie Wineland, other than losing to O'Malley, pretty durable guy, went the distance with Perez and Dodson. I think Castaneda wins the decision here. A little bit faster, a little bit more polished in terms of what he can bring to the table at this age. And Eddie Wineland, look, he's the same age as me. He's 36, but, he is getting up there, and he has taken a bit of damage to his career. So I got to go with Castaneda just, due to activity, due to age. And I think this is a good spot for him to get it done. Would I bet him at minus 130? I think there's some upside there. If anything, I might look at the decision prop because, like I said, Wineland pretty durable. Castaneda wins by decision is plus 159. You get plus money there. I think that's worth a stab.
That's not bad. That's not bad at all. Yeah, so I mean, you touched on a lot of the really solid points here. I like what Eddie Wineland does still, but his style is a little outdated. I mean, he's mostly a boxer, but that will play pretty well here against John Castaneda. He's got good head movement, a good big right cross, and he's willing to hit and return. He's one of these guys that likes to fight in the fire. He takes your punch and then fires back as hard as he possibly can. The only thing for me is this is a massive step down in competition for Eddie Wineland. I mean, if you look at the names on his record, I know he's 1-3 in his last 4, but those 3 losses came to Alejandro Perez, who right up until this recent skid that he's been on looked like he was on a rocket ship in the division. John Dodson, who is always in title contention talks, and then Sean O'Malley, which I know Sean got derailed recently as well, but we know how good of a striker Sean is. Like there's nothing wrong with that. He got one low-class opponent in Gregory Popov, and he handled Popov, knocked him out in the second round. And I feel like that's kind of the situation that we might find ourselves in here. Castaneda is also 1-3 in his last 4. So far, I mean, he looked pretty good against Nathaniel Wood. He looked better than I thought against Nathan Wood. But I'm sorry, it was Nathaniel, and I tried to get Daniel and Nathan out at the same time. That led to Nathaniel.
It happened.
So he's a guy that he got a COVID short notice UFC debut off of 1 win and 2 losses. You just don't see that. This guy has struggled with lower level competition basically his entire career. So I'm not quite ready to say that he's taken this giant jump up. He's now suddenly ready for the UFC. We might be a little overly high on Nathan Wood. I mean, I know he got beat by John Dodson and Casey Kinney. Those are both good opponents, but his only win of note in the UFC is Andre Ewell, a guy who is known to gas out in the third round. He was able to take advantage of that and choke him out, something we've seen time and time again. So, I mean, I just feel like the book is out on Castaneda. I'm not sure if he's ready. I'm not sure if he's going to fit here just yet. The one thing that I do know about him is he's an absolute dog. He's one of these guys that'll take the fire and return. He's willing to turn the tide late in a fight after getting beaten up for a couple of rounds. And that's the one thing that I can kind of see edging out the victory for him here against Eddie Wineland. Eddie might outclass this kid in the first round. Eddie might look great in the second round, but then that age, that durability, it starts to settle in, and the young, hungry kid that just doesn't know when to stop can suddenly start putting it on the veteran. And that's something that I'm a little afraid of happening. So this is probably going to be a pass for me. I lean with the dog and Eddie Wineland. I feel like he's got the skill set, the experience, the ability to turn back the clock on this kid who just isn't quite there yet. But at the same time, John Castaneda is that age that he'll be able to make that improvement. He'll be able to get better fight to fight. And this may be the fight that he shows that off. So I'm not feeling super comfortable on either side of this fight, and I wouldn't be shocked either which way it goes.
Yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention, Castaneda also has a win on the regional scene over Gustavo Lopez, who's in the UFC now. That was a 4th-round finish. So this guy has that experience of sort of fighting, and fought in tournaments as well, like I mentioned for Combate. So I think that experience is going to help him in a situation like this where he's fighting a veteran, has a lot more fights in them. But I know what you're saying. Like I could see a Wineland upset here. You know what I mean? Like Eddie's one of those guys, like against the Popov fight, which was in Chicago, was at that card back at UFC 238. That's one where he knocked the guy out in the second round. I believe he was the underdog there. So we'll see. Eddie Wineland's we'll see. Is this the beginning of the end for Eddie Wineland after the O'Malley loss, or is he going to get a win in there and kind of prove us all wrong? We'll see.
Exactly. Get that one last veteran wind under his sails. The thing for me, this might be a violence bet spot, James. I might go under 2.5. They got the total set at 2.5 plus 175 plus 185 on that under. And that doesn't sound too bad to me. I mean, we just saw Wineland get a life-changing knockout. Some guys at the end of their careers at this age, you just don't bounce back from that. And that was 7-8 months ago. So even though he's right around that time frame of about 9 months, I like to see people take off after that bad of a knockout. At 36, that still may not be enough time. And we know that John Castaneda, he has volume, he's got power in his hands. I think both these guys could absolutely land the knockout. And Wineland, that's not his first knockout loss. He's had 4 of them. So this may be an underspot where we can turn that into a plus line and just not care who wins as long as it's violent.
Absolutely. Good point.
That might be the play for me. We'll see. Okay. Bug.
It happens.
I hate when that happens. I'm live. Get off me. All right. We have got 377 live viewers. Thank you all so much for spending your evening here with us. We are almost at the end of the preliminary card. This card has a massive preliminary slate, and this is COVID times, so expect to lose 4 of these fights. This card is probably going to get smaller by the time fights kick off, so just a heads up. I do want to give a shout out to my sponsors. We do have GOAT Capital Sports that's been with me since the beginning. Find them at GOAT Capital _ over on Twitter. They have been absolutely crushing the last couple of weeks, and on top of that, they're running this new promotion where you can't lose. They've got a $25 subscription, and if you tail them and you losing record for the week with those picks, you get a refund of your $25. So go check them out. It's a good deal. Let them know Clint sent you, and they've been crushing it. In fact, they called Berger to win the golf tournament on Saturday, and I think he was 12-1. So lots of big scores coming with GOAT Capital. Go check them out. Next fight coming up here is one that I cannot wait to talk about, James. In fact, I think I'm going to let you lead this one because I might have my tinfoil cap on here. Lightweight fight, Drakkar Klose taking on Luis Pena. Klose is 11-2-1, coming off a bad knockout loss. Pena is 8-3, also coming off of a bit of a bad knockout loss and filling in short notice here. Talk to me about these guys.
So yeah, it was supposed to be Drakkar Klose and Jai Herbert. Luis Pena steps up on a couple weeks' notice to take this fight, but I'm glad to see Drakkar is still on the card. He hasn't fought in a while since he competed against Beneil Dariush. I did interview Drakkar Klose before this fight when he was supposed to fight Jai Herbert, but a lot of good tidbits in that interview because there's a couple things I didn't know that I found out during that interview. The first being he is no longer at Fight Ready anymore. He didn't mention the coach's name specifically, but I think we know who he was talking about. He said he basically had a falling out with Eddie Cha, so he's no longer there anymore, and he's been training at a couple Muay Thai gyms there. He's been training a bit with Sean O'Malley, so that to me is a bit of a red flag in the sense that, I think Fight Ready was a good fit for him. There's a lot of good training partners there. I know he did spend a good chunk of his camp training with Michael Johnson. Johnson's out in Arizona now training out there. So I think that's good at least. Johnson's a veteran, good guy to train with there. But Klose has not fought since the Beneil Dariush fight, which if you go back and watch that fight, he got knocked out and obviously, first time he was finished in his career. But I thought Klose was looking good leading into that knockout, believe it or not. I mean, he was landing some shots on Beneil as well. And we've seen the run that Beneil's gone on recently, of course, getting that win over Diego Ferreira a few weeks ago. So, I don't think that's a bad loss to have. This is a guy in general that uses his wrestling very well. He typically wins fights. He might not be the most exciting fighter in the division, but he's a guy that is going to get it done, right? You look at the UFC record outside of the David Tamer loss and the Dariush loss, he's got wins over Bobby Green, Lando Venata, Diakaze in a fight where I know he's an underdog there. So he gets it done when he needs to. Drakkar Klose, 32 years old, 5'9" with a 70-inch reach. Luis Pena, like he is with most of his opponents, is the much bigger opponent, 6'3" with a 75-inch reach. So 5-inch reach advantage for Luis Pena, a little bit taller as well. But can he use that height and reach to his advantage? It has backfired. I mean, you look at the Matt Frevola fight, you look at the, Kama Worthy fight, where fights that I thought Pena should have won. He didn't end up getting it done here. Pena hasn't fought since June of last year as well. So both of them coming off pretty decent layoffs into this fight. Pena, of course, now training an American Top Team, which I think is a much better fit for him in terms of bodies and training partners. Prior to that, he was at AKA. This is how I see this fight, Clint. I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. I think Klose is going to do a good job of using his wrestling, really, neutralizing a lot of the weapons that Luis Pena has, whether it's his stand-up, whether it's his ground game. I think you could see, if you look at Pena here, if you look at some of his opponents here, I'm not seeing a lot of great wrestlers, right? And that's something that Klose is sort of, he can always fall back on. His striking's getting better as well. We're seeing Drakkar obviously, make improvements in that area. And like I said, one of the gyms he's training at right now is actually just like a Muay Thai gym. So I think we're going to see more of the striking on display, but he can always go back to the wrestling. And that's something where I could see him getting the takedowns and really sort of grinding out a fight. Because there's, what fight was it? It was a Steven Peterson fight. That was a fight I couldn't believe he won. I thought Peterson had edged that one out as well. So we've seen times where Pena has not been able to capitalize. And I think this is another opportunity there. So the odds right now, like I said, Klose is a slight favorite in this one. I actually like him a lot better by decision. Klose is not a finisher, at least not in the UFC. He doesn't have a single finish. You have to go all the way back to August of 2015, the last time Drakkar Klose had a finish in a fight. So right now, I was looking at it the other day, and I talked about this on my breakdown yesterday. Where am I getting the odds here? Here we go. Drakkar Klose by decision is actually, it's only -105, so you're not getting a ton of value there, but it may be better than almost close to 2-1 odds at the same time. But I just don't see Klose finishing Luis Pena. He might, but I don't know. Either way, I think this is closest fight to lose. Curious your thoughts on this.
Okay. So I like it. And yeah, I spotted on his Instagram that he was no longer at Fight Ready. And for me, that's a massive red flag. I like Fight Ready. I like what they do. I feel like they've got one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the game today. So the fact that he is hopping around Arizona, he was at the MMA lab, then he went to Fight Ready. Now he's at TW, BJJ, and MMA, and he's fighting with Michael Johnson, a guy that just got cut from the UFC. Like, he seems lost, James. He seems like a man who has lost his way. Now, he does walk his opponents down. He has sharp boxing. I like what I see from his hands. He has heavy, hard leg kicks and good submission defense. That's something that's got to be said. The guy, he went with Beneil Dariush on his back for an entire round and didn't give up a sub, which is something not a lot of people can say. This is a bit of a step down for him going to Luis Pena. I mean, not a bit of a step down. It's a large step down in competition from Beneil Dariush to Luis Pena. But the thing I spotted when you look at his stats is he's actually only got a 68% takedown defense rating. Now, that sounds like it's pretty good. That's not bad. But anytime you dip below that 70% mark, that's where I start to worry just a little bit. Luis Pena coming in here on short notice. He's been training at ATT. That's where he's been for a long time. And if you don't know, Peter Yan, the champion, has moved over to ATT for this camp, and they've been getting work in together as well. He's tall, he's long, he has good level changes, he relies on that grappling, and at 155, he's just massive compared to everybody else. And when he is on top, he has dominant positions. He is so precise and positional with his grappling that if he can out-grapple you, you're in trouble. And then he's got that body triangle that you just can't get out of. He's got those lanky, long legs. He knows how to tie them around your body. And the only issue that I think he's had is when people are able to match his size and his physicality. I bet against Luis Pena, against Kama Worthy, when he was a big underdog, because everybody underestimated my boy Kama, comes in here as a plus 200 underdog, gets the finish late in the fight. And I'll tell you something, James. I went back and I rewatched that fight leading up to this, because you know I got to do my tape study. You know I got to do my research. Luis Pena was winning that fight until Kama Worthy snuck that submission in there. Luis Pena made one mistake late in the third round, and he got his neck caught in the long, lanky arms of Kama Worthy. He struggled with someone who was able to match his height and reach, and then made one mistake at the end. I feel like this is an overreaction. If you look at where this line opened up, the bookies had these guys as basically a pick'em. Drakkar Klose was a minus 135 favorite, and he got smoked all the way up to minus 230 with so many people just looking to fade Luis Pena, jump on the train. This might be a spot where I take the classic pivot and return. We bet on Kama Worthy in his UFC debut against Pena because he was a plus 200 underdog, and he did exactly what we needed him to do. It was a very close competitive fight. He got the win for us. We faded him against Aiemann Zahabi in his next fight because we knew now everyone's on the hype train. This is the exact opposite effect. The recency bias of Luis Pena losing to this guy Kama, who now they've seen get knocked out in the UFC, is what's driving this line the way that it is. This is a very close fight. I think that Pena is going to have the height and reach advantage, and Drakkar Klose is not an explosive close the distance kind of guy. He's going to be plodding. He's going to walk forward. He's going to try and get in range, and Pena can just jab his face off for 15 minutes. Once Drakkar Klose does get in range, again, we're in the apex. We're in the small cage. It favors grapplers like nobody's business. And if he can do the same thing Beneil Dariush did with just controlling the body of Klose, I'm not saying he's the same level as Beneil Dariush, obviously, but if he can just control the body of Klose against the cage or get him to the ground, he's absolutely going to be live to make this thing close, tight, and hairy. And honestly, this is going to be a dogger pass spot for me. I'm going to wait. I'm going to sit back, and I'm going to watch all the money roll in on Drakkar Klose. And if I can get 2-1 on Luis Pena, folks, I'm going to back the dog.
Interesting. I can see it, like I said, because, you know, Pena's, like you said, height and reach advantage. Drakkar, actually, I'm trying to even think if Drakar's fought a guy that's like, you know, a lot bigger than him in his career. I'm just looking at some of the opponents. No one really stands out from that regard. So we'll see. We'll see for sure.
And I want to break down Drakkar Klose. I'm going to catch a lot of heat for this pick, like I always do when I go against the market and take the underdog nobody sees coming. Let's look at his record. His record in the UFC is phenomenal. He's only got 2 losses. But he's got a split decision over Mark Diakase. Mm-hmm. Diakase hasn't turned out to be the fighter we expected him to be in the UFC. That was a razor-thin fight. He has a decision loss to David Tamer. That's a bad loss, James. You shouldn't be losing to either of the Tamers if you're UFC caliber.
Well, hold on. Hold on. I just got to point out one thing quickly. I think you're confusing the Tamer brothers because David Tamer actually has a good record in the UFC. His brother does not. A lot of people get that mixed up. If you look at David Tamer, I don't even know what he's doing right now. I think he lost his last fight. We haven't seen him since. He actually has a good UFC record. Just want to point that out because I know
you're absolutely correct.
People get the brothers mixed up.
I'm a little too harsh on that. I mixed up the Tamers there. You're right.
It's all good. No worries.
Groovy Lando Venata. That's a guy with no fight IQ. That's a guy with slick striking that never does the right thing. Bobby Green, we've talked about this guy a million times. He fights to his opponent's level of competition, and he's lost so many decisions that it's not even funny because he just can't do what you need to do to win the game. And then Christos Giagos. Now, that's a decent win. That's a half-decent win. But again, he's not a guy that's necessarily lighting anybody on fire. He's relatively limited. He's a decent grappler and a decent boxer. It's his best win, and it's not that great of a win. So he's mid-tier, Drakkar Klose is. I'm not sold that this guy is ever going to be a problem in the UFC. And Luis Pena, as much as he's been a disappointment, he's only 27. He's still hungry. He's still growing. He's still filling into his frame. He's still at ATT training with guys like Peter freaking Yan. He's going to get better. And like I said, he was beating Kama Worthy until he made the one mistake late in that fight, and he plays the game, James. He's not going to be this guy that decides, I'm just going to do something flashy and let this thing slip away. He's going to wrestle. And if he wrestles for 15 minutes, this fight could be close. It could be a split. He could lock up a takedown late in the round that steals it for him. that's the side that I think I want to be on in this fight, especially if I'm getting around 2-1.
Okay, a couple things I wanted to just point out there. And again, I like you're bringing a lot of good points to the table, and I 100% agree here, but I just want to clarify a few things. First off, the Diehard fight. I was at that fight. I'm even looking at MMA decisions right now. Not a single media member scored that fight for Mark Diehard in that fight. It should have been a unanimous decision. It wasn't an exciting fight, but I thought Klose clearly won that matchup. So I know you brought up that it was a split and that Diehard is not that good. I agree there. I mean, if he would have finished the fight, we might have a stronger argument on the Klose side here, but totally agree there. And the Giagos fight, if you remember, that was a short notice fight for Giagos because it was supposed to be Dariush on that card. Dariush got injured. Giagos stepped in. There was also a weird thing going on with his management because at the time, Drakkar was rep by Iridium. Giagos is also rep by Iridium. I know it kind of messed things up to the point of where Drakkar actually left Iridium at that point and signed with Daniel Rubenstein. So just saying like, look, I don't want to be with a management company that reps so many fighters. I don't want to have, certain people playing favorites, whatever. So that was a good win for Drakkar at the time. But again, some weird circumstances where switch up an opponent and all that other stuff. So we'll see. This is going to tell us a lot here. You're right. Because Pena's a guy, I agree that, could surprise us here on Saturday. And Klose might be, maybe a bit overrated. But at the same time, I tend to lean more on the side that I think Klose is actually a pretty decent fighter. And I think if he can just use if his head's right and he's ready to go, I think he can get the win here. But we'll see. This is why I like talking with you, man, because we're always getting different angles on this stuff.
Absolutely. And the chat loves when we disagree and we're not just, patting each other on the back the entire time. So this is perfect. And I just want to say, I do think Klose is a good fighter. I actually really like Klose. But when it comes to situational stuff, the fact that he doesn't have a head coach right now, the fact that he's jumping from place to place and he's lost, that's a spot I want to fade.
100%.
That's a spot
that is a red flag. That is absolutely a red flag. When he told me that, I was like, because Fight Ready, they actually, well, to be fair, a lot of fighters left the lab at that time, right? It wasn't just him. It was Hunter Azure, Bobby Moffitt, there was a big falling out with John Crouch. I don't know what the deal is. I never sort of got the story there, but that was part of it. But I mean, Eddie Cha, come on, they're talking Korean zombie striking coach, one of the best, who's Eddie Chaw's working with Pitbull now. I don't know if you saw that on Instagram. This is one of the best coaches in the world. So I don't know what happened there. It's unfortunate because I think an Eddie Chaw coach, Drakkar Klose, is a better fighter, but we'll see. Great point about him not having a head coach.
All right. And now, James, correct me if I'm wrong. You are dang it, I forgot. Who's your team? Who's your hockey team, James?
Canucks, man.
Canucks. Okay. I thought so.
Yeah,
all right. If anybody has been noticing my incredible degeneracy in my NHL action, we did tweet out that Anders Lee would score the first goal at 16-1 for the Islanders game, and you can cash those tickets if you're rolling with me on your degenerate hockey.
I gotta start following your hockey bets. I haven't looked as closely as I like, but
I'm a wild man, James. When it comes to hockey, I'm a complete degenerate, and I'll lose 10 bets on a single night, and then the next night I'll hit 8 out of 10, and some of them will be plus 500 and plus 600. The swings are like this when I bet hockey, so you may not want to tail me, but buckle in if you do.
We have our mutual buddy Ian Cameron, who does he works for Pub Sports. He also does some stuff for Line Movement, which is a company I work for as well. So he's on the money when it comes to a lot of that hockey stuff as well. I kind of look at his stuff. So
I listen to Ian every day. Shout out to the Ice Guys and their daily show. I love listening to them and their hockey stuff. All right. Here we go.
Let's keep it moving.
Good disagreement there. Let's move this along so we don't, take 4 hours tonight because this card is big.
It is.
Featherweight fight coming up here. Jared Flash Gordon taking on Danny Chavez. Jared Gordon is 16-4. Danny Chavez 11-3. And I don't have very many bets on this card, James, but I will tell you, this is the one that I have already bet. This is the one that I've already tweeted out. This is the pick that I like. I'm on Danny Chavez at -135. Jared Gordon is a fighter that I have stamped fade on. I do not want to back this man. He's a hard-nosed grappler, great wrestling skills, but he has huge durability problems. This guy does not have a chin, and he's been knocked out 4 times. He's training at Rufus Sport, which is a gym that I'm also looking to fade. They're on a bit of a skid. They're on a bit of a downslide, and they just don't seem to make the right choices and adjustments round to round in the midst of fights. Danny Chavez, he's relatively new to the UFC, but this guy's got incredibly fast hands. He's got solid power, accurate punches, and really hard leg kicks. To top it all off, he's a fantastic grappler himself, and he likes to use that Chuck Liddell style to keep the fight standing. He doesn't want to take his opponent down, but he wants to keep this thing up on the feet where he can pop people in the face. And on top of that, he's going to be just a little bit shorter than Jared Gordon, which anybody who knows wrestling knows that you have to have the lowest hips out of the 2 fighters, and I think that's a huge advantage in this spot. The fact that Jared Gordon is going to have a harder time getting under the hips of Danny Chavez in my opinion, adds to his takedown defense. I think Danny Chavez is going to knock Jared Gordon out, James. How do you feel about this fight?
Oh, this is great. We're going to disagree 2 times in a row. This is
Yes.
perfect. So I want to correct you there. Jared Gordon is not at Roufusport. He hasn't been at Roufusport for a while. He actually moved up to Florida. His fiance lives there. He's been at Sanford MMA the last 2 camps, including the Chris Fishgold fight. That's why he looks so good in that fight, I think, is because he's finally at a camp where he's working with guys. Like it's just a better fit for him at this point. And you're right. A lot of people who live in Roufusport these days, not sure what's in the water there, but I think Sanford's been a much better camp. That's actually the reason that Brendan Allen is training at Sanford as well, due to Jared Gordon being like, hey, come out here. We got some big bodies. You can work with some guys there as well. So, and I want to put some context on this because yes, Jared Gordon has durability issues, but you got to look at who he's losing to, man. Diego Ferreira, Joaquim Silva, Charles Oliveira. Are you kidding me? This guy might be fighting for the title soon. And he's lost 2 fights ago to one of the best fighters in the UFC right now, Charles Oliveira. So I think context is important as well. I was so impressed with Jared Gordon's win over Chris Fishgold in a fight that I picked against Jared Gordon. And Jared had every reason to lose that fight. It was in Abu Dhabi. His wife his fiance had a miscarriage. I don't know if people knew that. He had a lot of adversity to deal with going into that fight, including his corner not being there. Do you remember that? They got COVID. So Paul Felder had to step out of the commentary booth.
I do remember that.
Same with Eric Nixick. So just to show the type of adversity, I mean, we know Jared's story as well, coming from, really tough upbringing and some of the stuff he's had to overcome. I mean, just that, to put on that type of dominant performance over a Chris Fishgold really impressed me. And I never thought we'd see Jared Gordon back at featherweight again. And it was actually Duke Roufus who said, don't go to featherweight. It's too much of a cut. But Jared seems to have figured that cut out. And I think the fact that he's had, a lot of notice for this fight, it's been, from what I know, both fighters have known about this for a while, at least since before the holidays. I think is going to, favor Gordon well. But like you mentioned, Danny Chavez, a guy that I've underestimated as well. He actually gave me crap for it in our interview. I interviewed both fighters, but he was cool. But he was like, Danny was basically like, he's like, look, man, even you picked against me. But and by the way, if you're a fighter out there and you're watching me and making my picks, like, look, there's like, I'm just doing my job. It's not like I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Most fighters are cool about it, but then you get the odd ones that are upset. But in general, I try and be as, when I'm trying to break down fights, as you guys can see here, I try and be respectful. So if a fighter's got a problem, if they know me well enough, they know I'm not coming from a place of disrespect. So anyways, Danny Chavez, big win over TJ Brown. The fight before that actually was even more impressive. Dylan Calla, this is a training partner of Brian Barberena. I've been hearing Dylan Calla's name for a long time. He was sort of thought of as a guy to make the UFC. It hasn't really panned out that way, but he finished Dylan in the very first round. That's the fight that got him the ticket to the UFC. This is actually a battle of Florida because Chavez trains at MMA Masters, Jared Gordon at Sanford MMA. So it'll be interesting to see. And again, Jared has Chaz Skelly on this card. Chavez has Rafael Alves on this card as well. Another little tidbit there. But this I see as a pick 'em, but I think Jared Gordon's going to edge this one out. And what I sort of go off of is just not only cage experience in the octagon, but also the fact that I think Jared has found his calling as a featherweight. If you remember, he had issues in his debut fighting Mitchell Quinones. I think he actually ended up missing weight for that fight. Yeah, he was 149, but he's figured that out. And you know what? 145 is a much better weight class for Jared Gordon. I think he's more powerful. I think he's going to, be able to use some of his tools a little bit better. When he was at 155, I mean, fighting a guy in Oliveira who's just ginormous for the weight class anyways, that's a tough ask, right? So I like Gordon here. Could Chavez pull off the upset? Absolutely. I ate some crow for sure when I picked TJ Brown against Chavez. It could absolutely happen here, but I think Gordon takes it. I feel pretty good about him going out there, putting on another good performance here. And yeah, a little bit of a layoff, since July of last year coming in there. I guess same thing with Chavez as well. Hasn't fought since August, but I'm taking Jared Gordon here. He's had a full camp. He's getting to work with guys at Sanford like, Adam Borax and, Skelly's there. And there's a lot of just high-level training partners there. I think it's a much better fit for him. I think we're going to see another good performance from Jared Gordon like the Chris Fishgold fight. Tell me what you think about that, Clint.
Okay. So the thing, I guess, is he's got to prove it to me, James. I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is until he shows me I'm wrong. And the Chris Fishgold fight, I bet on Chris Fishgold that night. I took my shot there. And what I've got to say is Fishgold, he's not a striker. He doesn't have a lot of power in his hands. Now, if he lands perfect, then okay, sure, he can hurt some people. And that was part of my justification for making that bet, is that he does have some underrated power, but he's only got 2 knockouts. He's mostly a submission guy. Chris Fishgold is more than willing to play off of his back, and that's the perfect opponent for a Jared Gordon. This is a spot that I missed. Jared Gordon was set for a bounce back against a guy who was willing to roll to his back and let him wrestle. And that's what we got. He stayed on top of a guy who was willing to accept the takedown every single time, and that's the exact opposite of Chavez. Chavez will not give up the takedown. Jared Gordon's going to have to make that takedown. He's going to have to dominate the grappling to get that takedown. And I don't know if he can do that. I know he's a good wrestler, but I think that Danny Chavez is going to make this interesting. And on top of that, Gordon is not a finisher. So if this gets into the second round, the third round, can he keep those takedowns up? Danny Chavez has got a good gas tank, and he's got really strong hips. Late in that fight, he's going to make those takedowns harder and harder and harder. And because of that, I think we see a round 2 or a round 3 knockout. When Gordon starts struggling to get those takedowns, when he starts getting a little gassed, a little bit tired, and then he keeps running into the brick wall of Chavez. Next time you interview Chavez, you'll have to let him know that I called the round 3 knockout.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see. Yeah, it's gonna be, it's a close, and the odds indicate that, right? I mean, there's no like clear favorite here, and I think it's a good test for both guys. Chavez. Oh, by the way, one other thing I wanted to mention that I like that Chavez said, he's pretty realistic about his career. He's 33 years old. He's like, look, like, I got to take these tough fights. If I ever want to be a champion, at my time's now. I no, build me up type thing. I like that attitude from him, and I think Gordon sort of knows the same thing here. Like, Gordon's a guy that I think will be fine when his fighting career is over. He's a pretty popular guy. I know, very well respected in the industry as well, whether it's commentary or something else after this. But I think both guys are kind of at a stage where it's like, okay, we got to make some movement. That's where the matchmaking here is on point.
That's fair. That's fair. And, I like that attitude as well. And I think the UFC, this is not quite what we talked about before with prospect versus prospect, but they want to see who's sticking around. Because like you said, Danny Chavez is 31. Jared Gordon is 32. If either of these guys are going to make a run at it, if either of these guys are going to make a real career of it, they got to do it now. And both of them, Danny Chavez just getting to the UFC, Gordon being up and down in the UFC, it's not a walking papers fight. I don't think anybody's getting cut from the UFC in this fight, but it's definitely an opposing directions fight. One of these guys is going to get the fast track. The other one is going to be the next stepping stone for the UFC until they lose to a couple of up and comers and then they get cut.
Well said. Yeah, I agree.
All right, we finally have made it to the final fight of the preliminary card, one that I'm very excited about talking about. 390 live viewers, thank you all so much for hanging out with us this evening. We appreciate it. This is odds.com, and this is the Diehard MMA podcast. My name is Clint. I'm joined by James to talk UFC, sports betting, sometimes hockey, and every once in a while a couple of hot takes. Thank you for spending your Monday evening with us here on the pod. What we've got is Andrei freaking Arlovski taking on Tom Aspinall. Andrei is the guy that you just can't shake, James. We have a rule on the Diehard MMA podcast. I've told you this before. If you bet on a 40-year-old fighter, you better have a damn good reason to do so. You're not allowed to bet a 40-year-old fighter. You've just got to have a damn good reason to do it. And Andrei Arlovski has been turning back the clock for the last 4 years. He went from being the guy everyone talked about as being a chinny fighter, a guy that was on his way out, to a guy that you just can't get rid of. He's 3-1 in his last 4, and arguably won the split decision against Augusto Sakai. The guy could be 4-1 in his last 5. And then he got knocked out by Walt Harris, which, okay, who doesn't? Walt popped for performance-enhancing drugs that night. You could erase that one from his record, too. This guy has been incredible. He's been surviving at the top of the chain all these years and fighting a mid-tier of competition, which he's done very, very well against. You cannot write off Andrei Arlovski. Tom Aspinall is the newest, hottest kid on the block, though. 9 wins, 2 losses, 8 of those wins coming by knockout. Big power, sharp hands, good boxing, but he's fought absolutely nobody. He's 2-0 in the UFC, and he fought the ghost, the inflated ghost of Jake Collier. He fought Alan Boudreaux. I mean, he got rid of both those guys in the very first round of their fights, and damn well he should have. So the guy's got power. We know that. But what's going to happen when he fights a finessing, high-level striker like Andrei Arlovski, who's got 50 professional fights? Talk to me about this one, James.
Yeah, this is a dangerous fight, for both. Obviously, with Arlovski coming off the win over Boser, I thought, and look, Canadian bias aside here, I thought Boser won that fight. I thought that was more of an indication of Boser not really putting on his best foot forward in that fight against Arlovski than it was Arlovski winning. But nonetheless, the Philippe Lins win, I'll give him that. That was another fight where I think he was the underdog and took care of business. But the fight before that, he got knocked out by Rosenstrike. See, that's what kind of worries me a little bit, is that Arlovski still can be finished. And you talked about the age there, 42 years old. That's one thing that does scare me here. Now, obviously on paper, if you're looking at it, Arlovski's fought everyone, right? I mean, he's got a huge experience advantage in this. He has turned back the clock. He is the exception to the rule. I remember when he fought Brett Rogers in Strikeforce, and he decided for some reason he was going to stand and trade with the guy whose only way to win that fight was to knock him out, and he did that and he got finished. That was I just remember watching that being like, I think his career's done at this point. But you're right, he turned back the clock. He ended up going on this crazy run, and obviously now it's been a sort of a mixed result. I mean, he had the 3-4 fight unbeaten, or couldn't get a win in his last 4 fights, and then ended up, I think he's 3 wins in his last 4 fights, other than the Rosenstruck loss. But we're going to learn a lot about Tom Aspinall here in this fight. Like you mentioned, hasn't been incredibly battle tested. Did fight in Cage Warriors. I mean, that's a good promotion, but
it's a good promotion. The
guy he fought in there, the one that he fought to get in the UFC, was only 2-0. That's a big red flag as far as I'm concerned. And the guy before that, 6-2, guy before that, 3-7. That's where I do take a little bit of pause here. So I don't think it's a slam dunk that Aspinall wins. I think the way you do this fight is you get a little bit tricky in this one, okay? So what I would say is I think the likely result in this fight is that Aspinall knocks him out. I do think he can do that. I think he's young, he's fast. I mean, how many heavyweights in the division are 27 years old, like we were talking about before, other than maybe Jared Vanderaa and Spivak, right? But I think in general, Aspinall can win this fight by knockout. So I would look at the knockout prop for Tom Aspinall, which I don't know what type of value you're going to get. Let me look right here. We don't have the knockout prop yet per se, but I'm looking at the inside the distance. It's -110, which is you're not getting. I mean, it's better than almost 3-1. I mean, Aspinall should not be a 3-1 favorite here. I think we can agree with that. I see this more as a pick'em, to be honest. But I think if Arlovski wins, I don't think it'll be a finish. I could see it being more of a decision here, where Aspinall he's throwing the kitchen sink and it's not working out for him, and Arlovski picks up a decision. So I would almost do like a Aspinall inside the distance, and then maybe take like an Arlovski by decision, which, get this, Clint, +350 for Andrei Arlovski by decision. His last finish win, it's been a while. I'm looking here. His last stoppage win was May of 2015 against Travis Brown. That's the last time Andrei Arlovski won a fight by stoppage. So that's what I would look at in this fight. I get a little bit creative with the props. Who am I picking, though? I'm taking Tom Aspinall. I have to. At this point, I know that Arlovski turning back time with the last 2 fights. Like I said, I think the Boser fight was more of a case of Boser not showing up. I think Aspinall rises to the occasion and takes advantage here, and he knows what's at stake here, right? If he gets this win, he's going to get shot up like a rocket in that division. I think he gets it done. I think he knocks out Andrei Arlovski.
I couldn't agree more, James. I couldn't agree more. And honestly, you've gotten extremely creative with that setup, and I really like it, because Andrei Arlovski can be knocked out by big, sharp power punchers. It's been a while since he's fought one of those. Augusto Sakai is more of a volume guy. Ben Rothwell doesn't have the power he used to. Philip Linz is a complete bust and a fraud, in my opinion. Tanner Boser, so much smaller than Arlovski, he couldn't get that KO switch hit. So it's Jairzinho and Walt, who are 2 big power hitters, that knocked him out last. And the only thing for me is I can add a little grain of salt there that, as far as power goes in the UFC, my scale goes Francis Ngannou, Jairzinho Rosenstruck. So I don't think it's that bad of a loss that he got knocked out.
Right, good point.
But it's there. And Tom Aspinall is fast, he's precise, and he hits hard. But he has yet to win or lose by decision. He's never seen the judges' scorecards. I'm not confident that he knows how to. So if he gets out of round 1, I don't know what he brings to the table in round 2. I especially don't know what he brings to the table in round 3. So I love it. If you want to take the bet, do Aspinall inside the distance, just barely laying -110, and then hit the other side a little bit smaller, hedge it with Andrei Arlovski by decision at +350. That's a pretty sweet spot to kind of lock up which way this fight should go. If Aspinall shows up and wins his first ever decision in his career, I'd kind of be okay with losing, a unit and a half or whatever it may be that you decide to split to make sure you're hitting both sides of that coin.
Yeah, good point. By the way, did interview Aspinall. Really good stuff. You can check that out here on the channel as well. Just kind of giving some insight on taking this fight as well. And one thing I actually give him credit for, he talked about his anxiety. He gets really nervous before fights, and talked about how he deals with that and how much he loves fighting, that sort of helped him overcome the anxiety as well. A little interesting tidbit there. So if you guys want to check that out, like I said, it's on the playlist for UFC Vegas 19. So there you go.
Lots of good listening to do on James's playlist this week. 18 interviews my man did for this one. Lots of nuggets of information there. And shout out to Troy Nowak, calling us the deadliest combination on YouTube.
Troy, man. One of my big supporters on my channel. Love him. He's great.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. All right, finally we get to move to the main card of UFC Vegas 19. We got 5 fights here. Middleweight tilt. Phil Hawes taking on Nassourdine Imavov. And James, I'm pissed. I'm pissed because the bookies are not stupid people. And when we get opportunities, we have to punish them. We did just that. This is a fight that got scrapped. Hello, thank you, COVID times. And they've reset the line. I had plus 140 in my pocket on Nassourdine Imavov, and James, it's a pick'em. They're not giving me plus money on Nassourdine Imavov this time around. I got to pay minus 110 if I want to play my guy, and I'm a little upset about it.
Yeah, close fight. I agree with the odds, and I agree if you could get him at plus money, that is very interesting here. Of course, Imavov trains with Cyril Gain, coached by Fernand Lopez, so that's interesting. Had a great UFC debut against Jordan Williams in a fight. Was he the favorite? I feel like he was. Prior to that, had the win over Jonathan Meunier, the UFC vet. So this guy has some decent competition here. 24 years old, 6'3" with a 75.6-inch reach. Phil Hawes, 6 feet tall with a 77.5-inch reach. So it's actually Phil Hawes with the reach advantage in this fight. And we know the story with Phil Hawes. Has probably had the longest road to the UFC of any fighter. Was on Tough, was on Contender Series twice. I mean, this guy, he paid his dues to get where he is. And one of the cool things when I spoke to him, was the first time I had a chance to interview him, is that he said he was pretty much ready to give up on his career. And it actually was his manager, Daniel Rubenstein, who sort of convinced him to get back into it. And that's why you see Hawes making that change. He was at Albuquerque training at Jackson's. Now he's at Sanford MMA, another Sanford fighter on this card. The theme of Florida really going strong on this card or whatever. And Hawes, I mean, he made quick work of Jacob Malkoun in his last fight, 18 seconds. But do you want to warn people about that? Jacob Malkoun, I talked about this with Casey O'Neill. Malkoun only had 4 fights. Like, again, these are fighters that I think need a little bit more seasoning. I know, you can have as many amateur fights or as many, whatever other disciplines coming into the UFC, but I think 4 fights is not enough for anyone. And there are fighters out there that have more experience. So I felt like in some ways that wasn't a good indication of that, but I did like the win on Contender Series. The Bestiev or whoever he fought on that card, that guy was 10-3 and he finished him in the first round. Hawes has some power. He's kind of got a little bit of Hector Lombard vibes going in that division because he's a bit of a smaller middleweight, but he can pack a punch, right? And I think if people are trying to, reference old Phil Hawes fights, I think that's a bad idea. You look at like when he got knocked out by Julian Marquez or when he lost to Lewis Taylor in World Series of Fighting, that Phil Hawes doesn't exist anymore. This is Phil Hawes 2.0. The confidence is back. He's at a good camp where he's at right now, getting to work with really high level fighters like Vicente Luque and Gilbert Burns, and just a lot of really outstanding middleweights. I mean, those are welterweights, but you get what I'm saying, guys that are sort of around that weight class. Jason Jackson as well over in Bellator as well. So, as far as what I look at in the matchup here, I mean, both guys have good stand-up. Obviously, Imavov has a ground game as well. He's got a couple submission wins on top of that, but I think Hawes has the edge in power, and that's why I'm picking him here. So I think I know where you're going in this one, but I'm going Phil Hawes in this one. I think he does it again, and I think that just he's at the right point in his career right now where he's going to just take off, and I think this is the next step with him getting a nice win here.
Okay, James, I got a question for you. Have you seen Mean Girls?
Of course, yeah.
Stop trying to make Phil Hawes happen. It's not going to happen. The UFC is doing everything they can to get this man going, and even softballing him a guy like Jacob Malkoun just to get him that highlight reel win in the UFC. It's like, man, they are struggling so hard to get this guy built up. Now, I will say a big red flag for me here is the gym change. The big thing with Phil Hawes was he was a training partner of John Jones. He would work John Jones in the gym, man. Imagine what he's going to do at 185 to these guys. Like he had this big, cocky side of him, and Jackson's MMA just isn't what it used to be. Right. And just because you train with John Jones doesn't mean you're John Jones. But now he's moved and he's training with fighters that I respect, guys like Gilbert Burns that I would go to war for. Like, that's the right place to be. That's a good move. And that change is really causing me some pause. Again, he's fought nobody, though. And that's a big red flag for me as well. The big thing for me with Phil Hawes is he is a great hammer. He's maybe the best hammer, but he's a terrible nail. If he doesn't get the finish, he gasses out, he shells up, he doesn't know what to do with himself as soon as somebody else is the one who's got their foot on the gas pedal. My breakdown for this fight hasn't changed one bit, James. It's Phil Hawes early or it's Nassourdine late. I think that if Nassourdine is able to use that grappling edge, especially here, remember, we're in the apex, we're in the small cage. If he's able to pin Phil Hawes up against the fence, if he's able to dig for underhooks, get some blood pumping in those gigantic tree trunk arms, Phil's going to have a hard time in round 2. Phil's going to have an even worse time in round 3. So I'm definitely looking at a violence bet here. The only problem is, once again, the bookies are not dumb. They had it set at 2.5 for us last time. It's 1.5 this time. So under 2.5 is going to be chalked to like -200, and I don't know that I want to play that. It really pisses me off, James, because I had not one but two angles that I wanted to take on this fight last time out, and I had good numbers on them. Both those are gone for me this time, and I might end up having to pass. I think I might end up taking a flyer on Nassourdine Imavov inside the distance. Maybe play it that way instead of playing him straight, since I'm not getting the number I want. And Imavov inside the distance is about +250. That kind of gets me more in the realm of where I want to be. Or those of you who follow me and have for a long time, you know I love my round 3 props. I might have to go Imavov in round 3, thinking that Phil Hawes has made some improvements. He comes out here a better man. Imavov survives and stretches this fight out. And then maybe Phil Hawes sees the first round 3 of his entire career, and that's when things fall apart for him. So this one's going to be one that we play very, very lightly if we're going to play it at all. I'm still going to pick Nassourdine Imavov, but you're absolutely right. This may be the breakout spot for Phil Hawes.
Just one last thing I want to point out. All of his losses, okay, I just want to point this out. They're against good fighters. Like Andrew Sanchez, like that loss he had on, which by the way isn't even considered a loss because it was exhibition, but Sanchez just, he out wrestled him, right? I mean, it was just, that was the fight where Phil kind of was brought back down to earth. It's like, okay, you're not this, second coming or whatever. And then he fought Lewis Taylor, who ended up going to win the PFL tournament at middleweight anyways. Lewis Taylor's a good fighter. People forget Lewis Taylor had a UFC fight against Uriah Hall. That fight didn't end up happening. They rescinded his contract, so that's why he went over to World Series of Fighting. So Lewis Taylor's another good, not a bad loss to have. And Julian Marquez, I mean, Marquez, say what you want. I know he was losing that fight against Makavitolo. Maybe we can get into that later, but he still got the win. I mean, this is a guy that is very, has a lot of good wins in the UFC. Julian Marquez, has a win over Darren Stewart, the finish over Darren Stewart. This guy is pretty legit as well. So that's what, as much as you could say that Phil hasn't fought anyone good, you could also say that his losses are not against bad competition. So that's the last little point I wanted to make, but we'll see. Like I said, Saturday, we're going to learn a lot here about Phil Hawes.
Absolutely. And, if I can, you touched on something that I want to, bring up there. The two guys that you're saying that he lost to, they're two guys that are durable that were able to wait him out.
True.
Andrew Sanchez and Julian Marquez. That's exactly what I'm talking about with Nassourdine Imavov. That's exactly the type of fighter that causes Phil Hawes problems. And that's why I like him a little bit here, is he can follow that game plan. He can follow that established blueprint of getting this guy later into a fight and then taking advantage of him slowing down.
There you go. Excited to talk about this next fight, this heavyweight fight, by the way.
Here we go, James. Let's talk about it. We have got Aleksei Oleinik, the boa constrictor. I think he's the oldest fighter on the roster at this point.
He's 43, I think, right?
43 years old and still doing it. He's knocking on the door of 70 professional fights, man. No, he's not knocking on the door. I'm sorry. He's got 74. 74
he's knocked down the door. He's knocked down the door.
He kicked it in. Taking on Chris Daukaus. Holy crap. I'm going to let you lead this one off, James. Talk to me about these guys.
Well, first, I got to say, Oleinik might be one of my favorite interviews. So every time I try and book an interview with him, he sends me, rather than text me back, he'll send me a video, or for example, be like, hey, just a reminder about the interview. And he'll literally just send me a video going, like 4 seconds. So he's his
own
a different
thumbs up
guy.
emoji.
Yeah, I honestly, I think he's hilarious and good to see. He's still got a sense of humor here. But this is just like the fight we broke down before between Arlovski and Aspinall. It's an up and comer in Chris Daukaus taking on a veteran in Aleksei Oleinik. So right now, in terms of the odds, as you would expect, Chris Daukaus the favorite at -170, Oleinik at +150. Now the difference between Daukaus and Aspinall, in my opinion, anyways, is that Daukaus has actually fought some pretty good competition leading into the UFC. I know it's heavyweight, but if you look at Ring of Combat here. Some decent, they usually match up pretty well in terms of some of the competition here. He did lose to Zhu back in 2019, but in general, you're seeing some guys that are, decent on there. Actually, kind of now that I'm saying that, I'm looking at, because I just figured because he fought for Ring of Combat, he's pretty good, but now I'm actually looking at some of these records. I take that back. My apologies there. That's why I got to double check these things sometimes. But you get what I'm saying here is that I think Daukaus at least has a little bit more experience, is a little bit, he's fighting for Ring of Combat, which is one of the better promotions out there in terms of what we've seen here. So, we know the story with Oleinik. Obviously, he gets you to the ground. He's going to get you in a lot of trouble. That Derrick Lewis fight, he was close to, it looked like getting the win over Lewis in that first round. Lewis was on his back in that one, and it wasn't until the second round where Lewis kind of, kept it standing, was able to knock him out, right? So Oleinik's a guy that can still be dangerous. Does have a win over Verdum, 2 fights ago, had the submission win over Mo Green. Daukaus has been submitted before. You have to go all the way back to 2015. Sean Teed actually submitted him in the very second round, so that is a little bit of a concern here in terms of if he can get it to the ground. But that's kind of how I see this fight. By the way, tail of the tape here. 31 years old for Chris Daukaus, 6'3" with a 76-inch reach. Oleinik, 43 years old, 6'2" with an 80-inch reach. So it's going to be Oleinik who has a reach advantage, and it's going to be Daukaus who's got like a slight height advantage. But either way, they're going to be kind of similar in that regard in terms of physically. But Daukaus, you see him, he's a fast guy. He likes to go out there. He knows he's not getting paid by the hour, right? Quick win over Parker Porter, over Nascimento in his last fight. Again, I think these are better competitors than what Aspinall has faced so far in his UFC career so far in terms of the competition here. So kind of like the last fight, the Aspinall and Arlovski fight, like I would almost do a scenario of like Oleinik by submission prop with like Daukaus by knockout prop, because Oleinik has been knocked out. But the thing is, like, you got to get him there. You got to keep it on the feet. You got to make sure you don't get taken down. And we have seen that happen a couple of times. I mean, as much as I like Chris Daukaus, you look at who Oleinik's been knocked out in the last couple of fights: Lewis, Harris, and Overeem. These are mainstay knockout artists in the UFC's heavyweight division. Daukaus may be there, but I don't know yet. We don't have enough evidence of him in the octagon to do that. So I'm just going to quickly look at these props here and just see if there is any sort of value there. So Oleinik by submission, we don't have that prop out yet. I'm guessing it would be, I don't know if it would be plus money, but it might be kind of close. He is the underdog, actually, so I guess it would be plus money.
Inside
but
the distance is plus 195. So you got to think.
So you got to think there. I mean, I don't see Oleinik, necessarily knocking out Chris Daukaus, although it is heavyweight, could happen here. But Daukaus wins inside the distance is minus 145. You might as well just take him straight up. You're not getting tremendous exactly. So I just want to warn people, though, and I have an article on odds.com coming up here. It should be up here soon. I just wrote it today, but I do think the value on this fight leans more towards us on the Oleinik side because of the experience, because of the fact this guy is pretty tough to put out. If you look at some of the knockout losses, like I mentioned there, against guys that are sort of mainstays as knockout artists. I don't know if Daukaus is in that class yet. We have yet to see that, but I think this could be a situation again where we could see someone rushed a bit too soon. Like if you told me that both of these heavyweight prospects lose their fight on Saturday, I wouldn't be shocked, because I just think the experience gap is huge. But at the same time, could it be a case of this is the future of the heavyweight division where we have these two guys that have really, come up very quickly? Because that's the thing. If either of these two guys win, Aspinall and Daukaus, they're going to continue to propel up that division. And I know it's a bit of a mess at the top, but the UFC is going to push them hard. So kind of what I'm saying here is I'm going to pick Daukaus, but if you're going to bet this fight, I really feel like the value here is more on Oleinik, or you could do that sort of prop thing like I mentioned, where maybe just take Daukaus straight up and then hedge it with Oleinik by submission. So that's where I'm going there. Am I wrong here, Clint? How do you see this fight?
This is one where there's a couple of key differences here for me between this one and the last one that we talked about, and I'll get into that. So first and foremost, there's two old scrappy underdogs that I just can't stop trying to put my money on: Glover Teixeira and Aleksei Oleinik. These guys are just hanging in there. They are the exceptions to the 40-year-old rule. They just keep on performing at a high level, and they refuse to die. Aleksei Oleinik has the nastiest squeeze I've ever seen. This guy's jiu-jitsu is on another level. And even at 43, he just manages to get his arms around people's necks and choke them out. The problem with Aleksei Oleinik, he's got about 6 minutes of gas. He comes out like a bull in a china shop for that first round. And if you survive round one with him, he's got next to nothing in round two. The only reason he went to a decision with Fabricio Verdum is both those are old men that decided they wanted to strike because neither of them wanted anything to do with the other's ground game. It ended up being kind of a sloppy, exciting, really fun to watch slugfest between two big past their prime heavyweights.
Yeah, he dominated Verdum though in that fight. That was I couldn't believe that fight, and then of course Verdum beat Gustafsson in the fight after. And you're like, what the heck happened in the fight before? But yeah, that was a weird win for Oleinik, in the sense that I think like you said, it was going to be more of a jiu-jitsu fight, but Oleinik's stand up. I mean, he boxed for Fabricio Verdum. It was pretty impressive. Anyways, just want to point that out.
So there were some circumstances. That was one of Verdum's worst performances ever. That was during COVID. He didn't have a camp. He was training in his backyard, unless I'm recalling this incorrectly. And he fixed everything for his next fight. And that's where we actually got on him in his next fight and cashed a nice ticket with him coming off that just awful performance. But that was not the Fabricio Verdum that we're used to seeing. And I think that made a huge, huge difference in that fight. But Aleksei Oleinik, he uses his club and sub style striking to just close the distance, get his hands on his opponent, and then drag them to the mat. So that's something that really kind of scares me here, because we're in the small cage. Chris Daukaus, He is a fast heavyweight. He is light on his feet. He's got lightning fast hands, and he hits like a ton of bricks. Just excellent striking precision power from Chris Daukaus. I love this guy. He's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and that's something in his favor here, that if it does end up getting into a ground exchange, he's going to have better defense than a lot of people that have dealt with Aleksei Oleinik on the floor. Derrick Lewis, Maurice Green, Walt Harris, like none of those guys, even Mark Hunt, Junior Albini, like you go to the guys that he's been choking out with the Ezekiel chokes. Daukaus isn't going to let that happen. Daukaus knows better than to let the Ezekiel choke happen. So this is the issue that I've got. Aleksei Oleinik has no gas and no chin. So he's going to come out like a bat out of hell in round one and try and get this thing to the floor. Can he sub Chris Daukaus? Yes. Yes, he can. He can sub anybody. But the longer this guy manages to stick around and fight, the worse it gets, in my opinion, because he's coming off another bad knockout loss. And we talked about guys not being able to bounce back from those knockout losses. At 36, this guy's 43. Like, those durability issues are just going to get worse and worse and worse. And Daukaus, in my opinion, is the legit prospect of the two that we've talked about. I believe more in Daukaus than I do in Aspinall at this point, because he's shown skills, whereas Aspinall has shown me power. Aspinall is scary. Aspinall can hit anybody and take them out in the first round. That's fine. But Daukaus is quick. He's light. He's lightning fast for a big man, and he's a Cain Velasquez style heavyweight where he comes in about 230 pounds. He doesn't come in at 265. He's not looking to outpower you. He's looking to out-finesse you, and he lets the knockout come to him. It's something I really like to see. I think this fight is going to end up in a scramble and end up on the ground. But Chris Daukaus has good wrestling and good jiu-jitsu. I think he's going to be in the top position, and his ground and pound is nasty. I think the 4-inch reach advantage for Daukaus, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt will allow him to stay safe. The fast hands are going to be a problem, and I do think he's going to knock out Aleksei Oleinik on Saturday. I'm in the Daukaus side of things, and I'd love to see that the money is coming in here on Aleksei Oleinik because it's driving that price down for me. If I can get Chris Daukaus down to minus 145, minus 150, somewhere in that range, when he opened up as, minus 210, I would love to lay the wood on this guy straight, not have to worry about a prop, not have to worry about parlaying him. Just take Chris Daukaus straight at minus 140. That would be a slam dunk bet for me, in my opinion. It's scary. It's dangerous because Oleinik can submit anybody at any point in time. But I think Chris Daukaus is legit. And on top of that, if you've noticed, he's been taking his strength and conditioning super seriously the last couple of fights. If you rewind 3 fights ago when he fought Parker Porter, he was impressive in that fight. But boy, was he a big flabby man. This is a guy who did not take care of himself, and he moonlighted as a fighter on the weekends until he finally made it. Now he's taking training seriously. You go to his Instagram, and it's a bunch of gym photos. You look at his body, he's completely changed up how it looks. You can see the muscles. You can see the definition. And he's going to get bigger and stronger every single time he gets into the cage. So I think that him taking his training like a professional for the first time in his career is going to make the difference here. And I think his speed is just going to be too much because, yes, Aleksei has good boxing. Yes, Aleksei has good power, but he's lost that speed, and speed kills at heavyweight.
Certainly does. I forgot to point out, I did interview, well, I mentioned Oleinik, but I also interviewed Daukaus as well ahead of this fight. And I do remember him mentioning that. Yeah, you're right about him really trying to improve his conditioning and all that. So that could be another factor. You know what I might even look at now that you bring it up? They don't have it out yet, but Daukaus in round 2 might be worth a stab just because, like you said, Oleinik very dangerous in that first round. Maybe Daukaus needs to figure out his timing a little bit. I don't know. Maybe avoid sort of the onslaught, kind of like the Derrick Lewis fight, right? Where, Lewis, Oleinik came out of bat out of hell against Lewis in that first round. Second round, Lewis was able to capitalize. Maybe the same thing here. But yeah, that's something to think about.
I don't mind that look at all. Daukaus round 2 looks like the first book that's got it out. Bet Online has it at plus 550.
Oh, I saw. I think it was plus 650. Let me double check that. Round 2.
It's showing 5 for me right now.
I'm seeing 6. Weird. Maybe I got to refresh it. Let me see here. But
someone already hit it, James.
Yeah, as we're talking. But either way, yeah, I think a Daukaus finish is probably the most likely thing, right? I mean, it's heavyweight. It's kind of an obvious thing to say.
Exactly. It's heavyweight. I think Daukaus finish is the way to go. I think he's going to have what it takes to get it done here, and I think he's going to have what it takes to survive. I also don't know that. I don't know that Oleinik is even going to get the opportunity for the submission. I think that Daukaus will be able to use his reach advantage and the hand speed to keep him away. Because like I said, Oleinik has got to club and sub people. He's not a takedown artist. He's not a young man. He doesn't shoot in on the hips. He relies on getting people's back against the fence and then either pulling guard or mauling them to the floor. And if he can't close that distance on Daukaus, and if he's eating those sharp, precise punches while he closes that distance, I think he's just going to go down like a sack of potatoes. I mean, the other thing we could do is the under 1.5. Now, those of you who may know, I do a show for odds.com that's going to come out later this week called Total Madness. We go back over the card, overs, unders, things like that. So I'm giving away a little bit of the goods that are going to come out on my show later this week. But under 1.5 at minus 150 for these guys seems like the way to go, doesn't it? I mean, you've got 2 minutes and 30 seconds of round 2 that if somehow they manage to survive out of round 1, you've still got some of that in your back pocket for them to get it done. Either Oleinik drags this thing to the floor and chokes this guy out, or Chris Daukaus is going to knock him out. And I really don't see it going any other way. I don't see how Oleinik survives the boxing exchanges to get this thing to a decision, and I don't see how Daukaus survives on the ground to get this thing to a decision either. I think the under 1.5 might be the way to go. Great play. Definitely dig that for sure. All right. We are wrapping things up, everybody. We're getting to the end here. 3 more fights. Featherweight fight, Charles Rosa taking on Darrick Minner. And James, I'll keep this one pretty quick here. These guys are both jiu-jitsu aces. Scrambles, absolutely nuts on the floor. Charles is a high-level BJJ practitioner with incredible submission defense. You saw that in the Thug Nasty fight. He was able to go 15 minutes with one of the hottest prospects in the UFC, put in some really tough spots and gutted his way out of them. He's going to have the striking advantage here over Darrick Minner, a guy that is a one-round or bust type of fighter. He's got 22 wins by submission, 8 losses by submission, so he is a killer-be-killed guy. I feel like Charles Rosa is going to be able to survive the submission onslaught and then turn the tables on him. How do you see this one playing out? Same thing. This is a close fight. I think both are kind of similar in terms of where they're at in their career. Obviously, Rosa having more UFC experience. He's been a mainstay in the UFC for a while. People forget he went the distance with the Yair Rodriguez years ago, which looking back now, that's actually not bad. That even though I think it was a split decision loss in that one. But Rosa obviously had that injury after the Shane Burgos fight, was off for a while, but came back with a vengeance. Got that quick win over Manny Bermudez. Lost to Mitchell in a pretty one-sided fight. I mean, Mitchell dominated that completely, but then rebounded against Kevin Aguilar, the former LFA featherweight champion. Minner, he broke my heart, a lot of Canadians' hearts in that last fight against TJ Laramie. He killed us all, James. I was shocked. I was shocked in that fight. Just the result of it, just that Laramie was submitted so quickly. By the way, a lot of people writing Laramie off. He's got a tough fight against Damon Jackson, but I think he'll be back in that one. But that was a fluke, James. That was a fluke. TJ Laramie will be back. He got caught up against the fence. He did the right submission defense for that move, and he just had nowhere to roll because he got trapped up against the cage. If he had just 1 inch more of space, that submission doesn't happen. So you mentioned the good point about both of them having good jiu-jitsu. By the way, Darrick Minner, I spoke to both guys before this fight, but Minner obviously now sort of a mainstay at Glory MMA, which you've seen that camp. They've been outstanding over the last little bit. Julian Marquez getting the win on Saturday. You had Kevin Kroom last year. You had Minner himself getting the win over Laramie. That's a well-oiled machine over there. So I like that with Minner, that he's finally at a more structured camp there. Also his buddy Tim Elliott's there now too, so getting a lot of good training there. But I'll tell you what I like in this fight. I like the over 2.5 in this fight is at plus 135. I think I think the jiu-jitsu cancels each other out. Like, I don't see Rosa going out there and getting a quick submission win, and I don't see the same thing with Minner submitting Charles Rosa. Like, Bryce Mitchell can submit Charles Rosa over like the 3-round fight. I don't see Darrick Minner being the guy to do that per se. It's possible Rosa maybe gets like a stoppage win, with his striking, but even then you got to. I mean, it's been a while since you've seen him get like a TKO win in his career. So I think it cancels each other out. I think the over is the way to go, or even just go Rosa by decision in this fight, which right now is plus 280. I think that's great value there for Charles Rosa. His last couple, I mean, yes, he submitted Bermudez, but remember Bermudez had the bad weight cut, and he just, I think, was overconfident in that one. Kyle Bochniak, remember that fight? That was a decision fight. Kevin Aguilar decision. I think that's likely where this goes. So I like the over, and I also like Rosa by decision in this fight. James, my guy, we have been fighting like brothers all night. We finally agree. That's exactly the spot that I was going to point out on this one. We've seen so many spots where we're like under, violence. The submission defense is going to come into play here. I think the over 2.5 is absolutely the spot. Minner is the one who could get the finish here. Minner is the one that could get the submission here. And even though he has given up some bad opportunities, Rosa isn't much of a finisher. He's got great jiu-jitsu, but you just don't see it on the offensive front. And I think he's going to have a striking advantage, but he doesn't have the power in his hands to end the night. So because of that, I think this one's going to get extended. I think we see the judges' scorecards, and I was going to throw a flyer on Charles Rosa by decision when those props come out myself, because I think you're getting crazy value on turning this guy from a minus 170 favorite into a plus 300 underdog for him to win the way that nobody's going to see coming. I think the over 2.5 is by far the safer spot, because you never know. Maybe Minner, being the bigger, stronger guy, gets the control time, kind of like the Thug Nasty fight. He doesn't get the finish. He might get the nod on the judges' scorecards. But I do think that this is a spot where these guys will kind of cancel each other out, and we end up seeing the judges.
Completely agree. Yeah. We're glad we're on the same page in this one. We'll see about the last two fights and see where we stand.
Yeah, all right. Here we go. Women's bantamweight co-main event here. Ketlen Vieira taking on Yana Kunitskaya. I'll let you lead this one off, James. Talk to me about these.
Yeah, so in big fight for the division, I'm a little surprised to see this as the co-main event, but I almost see this as them trying to say, like, maybe you fight Nunes next, the winner of this. I don't know. I mean, we'll see sort of what they're thinking, especially in Ketlen Vieira's case. She had the title shot in her grasp, but then she got knocked out by Irene Aldana. So let's look at this a little bit closer here. Ketlen Vieira, 11-1 record, just the one loss to Aldana. I was at that fight. I couldn't believe that Aldana finished her in the first round. All the credit to Aldana. I think a lot of us underestimated her leading into that fight. But Vieira still has some good wins. Sijara Eubanks. I know Eubanks doesn't have a great record, but she is a very strong bantamweight. She was able to control her, get the win there. Had the win over Katzengano before that. Had the win over Sarah McMahon. So, some pretty good wins for Vieira in this fight. She's 29, 5'8" with a 68-inch reach, taking on Kunitskaya, who's 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. So the reach is the same, a little bit taller there for Vieira in this fight. Kunitskaya, I believe, for this camp is at American Top Team with her boyfriend Thiago Santos. So I think that's a good move there. There's a lot of women training there with like Nunes, Marina Moroz. There's a lot of fighters they're training. So that should be good. She was at Extreme Couture before that. She's coming off the win over Stolarenko in her last fight, which is the decision. The fight before that against Aspinall, if you guys remember, that was a fight which was kind of even going into that third round. In fact, I think you could have almost, given an edge there to Kunitskaya in that fight. And then Ladd just came out of the hell. Her boyfriend / coach Jim West was like, look, you got to get the finish. And of course, that's what she did. Aspinall went out there and took care of business. But Kunitskaya got some good wins, like Marion Renault. I know Marion Renault's a little bit older, but still a good win for her in that fight. Lena Landsberg was a good win. Had the debut against Cyborg. Who's going to win that debut? Nobody, right? So I think Kunitskaya can still be very dangerous. Yes, she has some stoppage losses earlier in her career, but I think she's really coming to her own. I think this line should be a little bit closer, to be honest. I am going to side with Vieira in this fight. I think she knows what's at stake here. Like I said, she's a co-main event. I think she sees this as a potential opportunity to fight for a bantamweight title here next. Do we see a finish in this one? I don't think it's likely. A lot of the last couple fights for Vieira, including Katzengano, including Eubanks, have gone the distance here. I would look at Vieira potentially by decision to get some better odds on this one, which, looking at it right now, are we getting plus money on that? We will see. Vieira wins by decision is minus 125. So a little bit better than that almost 3-1 odds there for Vieira. But I think on paper, Vieira is the better fighter. What do you think on this one?
We're going to line up again here, James. We're going to absolutely line up here. Vieira is coming from Nova União, a gym that really fell off after their stars kind of died out, and they're surging back, and they seem to be surging back with the women. And you know what? She's big. She's big for the division, and that's something that means a lot when it comes to this particular matchup to me. I'll talk about that here in a minute. She's extremely heavy on her punches. She has a nice active range-finding jab, and she's got a hard right hand, big power in her right hand. She's willing to stand in the pocket and brawl. That bit her one loss in the UFC, but she was fighting, like you mentioned, a fighter that we all absolutely overlooked and underrated in that spot. Nobody really saw that coming. She has excellent timing on her level changes, and she just got her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, James. She just got upgraded to the level of black belt, and a Nova União black belt is not a McDojo black belt. That is a good, solid black belt, so we can respect that. Yana Kunitskaya, like you mentioned, is Mrs. Thiago Santos. Good place to be, good training partners, and she likes to bully her opponents. That's her whole thing. Kind of like Holly Holm. She digs for the underhooks. She presses you against the cage. She'll make it as boring as she wants it to be, but she scores with those knees in the clinch, little peppering shots, and just holding you there. She's willing to grind a fight out. The only problem with Yana Kunitskaya, James, is she's got a 33% takedown defense rating. Even in the fights that she wins, she finds a way to her back. Even in the fights that she is dominating, at some point in every single fight, she is laying on her back with her opponent in a control position. I did the tape. I went back and I watched it. She always gets taken down. Ketlen Vieira lands 2.02 takedowns every 15-minute fight on average. So she's averaging more than 2 takedowns every single time she steps in the cage at a 52% accuracy. So that's a decently high takedown rate with a fantastic accuracy, because you'd expect that accuracy rate to be a little bit lower considering how many takedowns she is shooting. That's huge for me here. I don't think that Yana is going to be able to bully Ketlen because, as I mentioned at the start of this breakdown, Ketlen is massive. She's big, she's strong. And if you can't bully Ketlen, she's going to take you down. With that 33% takedown defense rating, this puts this thing on the ground with Ketlen on top and that black belt being a massive factor. I think Ketlen Vieira can win this thing by decision. I think she can win it by knockout. I think she can win it by submission. I think all the points of victory are on Ketlen Vieira's side. And because of that, she's one of my favorite pieces on the card. I have parlayed her, James. I've put her in a parlay with somebody a little later on in the card. Considering we've only got one fight left to talk about, I may have tipped my hand on who I've got her parlayed with, but the pick for me is definitely Ketlen Vieira, and I actually have a half a mind to sprinkle her a little bit inside the distance because I think she can manage to find a finish here.
Yeah, agree with all those points here. Hate to make everyone kind of boring watching this right now, but that's pretty much how I feel about this fight.
She's the favorite for a reason, and money is coming in on her for a reason. I think this is a good spot for her. Now, Ketlen Vieira inside the distance is plus 325. So I may just have a taste of that little action. James, let's talk about the main event. This is odds.com. My name is Clint for the Diehard MMA podcast. I've been graciously joined by my guest, Mr. James Lynch, who is absolutely one of our favorite guests to have, breaking down UFC Vegas 19 from a betting perspective. We have 400 live viewers. Thank you all so much for spending your time with us here tonight. And we've been rambling for 2 straight hours talking about the best sport in the world. So y'all are diehards. You guys know what's up. Thank you so much for the love and support. Smash the like button for me if you haven't already. James, talk to me about the main event of UFC Vegas 19.
So rebooked, obviously. This fight was supposed to take place in December. Blaydes gets COVID. Actually ended up having to drive back to Denver because he didn't want to get noticed at the airport because of all the COVID stuff and obviously the worry of COVID as well. So imagine that. You not only don't get to fight, you've got COVID and you got to drive from Vegas to Colorado. That's not an easy drive. So I just wanted to point that out. Glad they rebooked it though. This makes a lot of sense for the division right here, right? They're both highly ranked in terms of their rankings and all that. I mean, I've said this when this matchup was announced. I thought this fight would never happen for this exact reason. This is not a good fight for Derrick Lewis. Curtis Blaydes, 29 years old, 6'4" with an 80-inch reach, fighting Derrick Lewis, who's 6'3" with a 79-inch reach. It's very rare that Lewis is a smaller guy in the heavyweight division. Blaydes is a little bit bigger, not by much, but Blaydes is an athlete. We've seen the evolution in his career just with him, starting off, having that debut against Francis Ngannou to seeing just even physically, you look at him now, he looks in way better shape than he was before. He's like a true athlete when it comes to what he brings to the table here. Now, look, one thing I always rant about, and I'm going to rant on it here, is people calling Curtis Blaydes boring. I don't get it. He fought a guy in Volkov in his last fight who is very tough to finish. Derrick Lewis knows that because he knocked him out at the very last second in their fight a couple of years ago. And yeah, he didn't get it done, but most of Curtis Blaydes' fights do end in that sort of TKO type position where it's either on the ground and pound, or it's in the case of JDS, who's knees and punches. But this is a guy that does try and finish fights. It's just, he's been labeled boring by Dana White, so everyone runs with it. He's not a boring fighter. Tough competition. Like I said, his kryptonite is Francis Ngannou. We know this. He's tried it twice. He's been knocked out twice. The first time was in the second round. The second time was in the first round. So he knows what to expect here, and I think that's actually good for him in this fight because he's not going to try and mess around with Derrick Lewis. He's going to try and take him to the ground. He's going to try to out wrestle him, outpace him. And I just think it's a bad style matchup for Derrick Lewis because I want to point something out, and I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying this, but Derrick Lewis is not Francis Ngannou. Like, I don't know why people try and equate the two. I think Ngannou, yes, they fought, and yes, Lewis has a win over him, but I think in general, Ngannou, in my opinion, hits harder than Lewis, and I think he's a little bit more mobile than Lewis is in terms of what he can do in his movement in the cage. Lewis is a very, powerful guy, but he's not a guy that's, going to like out hustle a Curtis Blaydes in this fight. So, yeah, Curtis Blaydes, very steep. He's the biggest favorite on the card. He's minus 400. Is that a bit too steep? Honestly, I don't think it is. I think it's a bad style matchup for Lewis's only way to win this fight is if he knocks out Blaydes, and I think it's got to be early. And I think Blaydes knows that. I think he's not going to mess around in the stand-up in that first round. You remember with JDS, he had trouble getting JDS to the ground early on. He's like, okay, we'll just stand and strike. But even then, that was when he figured that out, I think, kind of in the second round. I think with Lewis, it won't even matter. He's going to be way faster, way more mobile. He's going to neutralize a lot of those weapons from Derrick Lewis. So I like Blaydes here, and I think Blaydes finishes this fight. I do. Whether he does, it's later in the fight, but you can get Blaydes right now inside the distance at -180. I think that's a little bit better. I see this is a 5-round fight, right? So that leads to more opportunities for him to go out there and get the finish. I know he didn't finish Volkov, but I think with Lewis, yeah, he's losing weight and maybe his cardio will be better for this fight. But typically, I just don't see Derrick Lewis going late into this fight, right? And that's where Blaydes, he had the cardio issues against Volkov. People noted that, where he was tired. I think he's fixed that. I think he knows that he's not just going to go out there and finish Derrick Lewis early on. He's got to go out there. And I think there's part of Blaydes that's kind of pissed off at everyone, being like, look, like, you guys call me boring. Have you watched all my fights? It's like people calling Izzy boring when he fought Romero and then he puts on a great performance against Costa. I digress, though. But yeah, if you want to check out my interview with Blaydes, talk to him on the channel there. Good insight into COVID. Didn't really have any bad symptoms or anything like that. But I just think this is a bad style matchup for Derrick Lewis. Clint, what do you think?
I'm right there with you, James. I'm absolutely right there with you. It's not often that me, the dog catcher, looks at a -400 line and goes, yeah, that's about right. You know, I always look to make a side for the dog. I always want to back the dog here. But Blaydes, he's 29 years old, man. He is just coming into his prime as a fighter. And like you said, Francis Ngannou is his kryptonite. That's the only guy that's been able to stop the onslaught of Curtis Blaydes. And let me tell you something, James. Francis Ngannou has 2 knockout wins over Curtis Blaydes. Blaydes didn't go unconscious in either of those.
Yeah.
Usually when you see Francis Ngannou hit somebody, they're dead on arrival. Like the Alistair Overeem knockout. He didn't wake up for 2 weeks. When he hit Curtis Blaydes, the referee stepped in and waved it off. He wasn't out. He was still trying to be in that fight. And that tells me something about the chin and durability of Curtis Blaydes. It's next level. It's something that we haven't seen before. Derrick Lewis does not hit as hard as Francis Ngannou does. Can he knock anybody out at heavyweight? Yeah, he probably can. He hits hard. I'm not saying he doesn't hit hard, but he's not on Ngannou's level. And on top of that, he's 36 years old. He's had back problems. He's had surgeries. He's talked about getting in shape. He's talked about working on his wrestling. He's talked about losing weight. He hasn't done any of those things. And he's now 36 years old and back in a potential title picture type of situation. He's going to get handled. He got handled by Daniel Cormier, who's a much smaller version of Derrick Lewis. I'm sorry, of Curtis Blaydes.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No
He's a much smaller version of Curtis Blaydes. And Blaydes is a guy that's perfect at the all-in and all-out, James. He will stay at range where a guy like Derrick Lewis can't hit him, and then he will close that distance, and if he has to, he will go Tony Ferguson on Derrick Lewis's ass and ankle pick him to get him to the floor. Like, he'll do whatever it takes to close that distance safely. With the small cage and heavyweights, he doesn't have a lot of room to cover. He'll be able to eat maybe one shot and then get the distance closed and get Derrick Lewis up against the fence. And once it's there, it's over. Derrick Lewis doesn't have takedown defense. Derrick Lewis has what I like to call the fuck you get up game. He bench presses 265-pound men off of his chest and just stands up whenever he wants to. That's how Derrick Lewis gets back to the feet after being taken down. You're not doing that to Curtis Blaydes. Curtis Blaydes knows all about wrestling positioning. He's going to be chest to chest. They describe it like you've got a pole going through your chest, your rib cage, through your opponents. That's how you're heavy on top. That's exactly what Curtis Blaydes does. And then the thing that he does that's even worse than that is he lets people get the feeling that they might get back up. And as soon as they expend all that energy to get back to where they've got 1 foot underneath them, he mat returns them. He's got the most ferocious chain wrestling grappling the heavyweight division has ever seen. He's like Khabib. He mixes in takedowns, 1 leg, 2 legs, trips, throws. Like, Curtis Blaydes can do it all to get his opponents to the ground. You can defend one, but you're not going to defend the second. If you can defend the second, you're not defending the third. And I can go on that for about maybe the 6 or 7 different takedown. He will eventually get you to the floor. Curtis Blaydes is going to break Derrick Lewis. Now, I don't know how or when he finishes this fight, but Derrick Lewis is a guy that's really, really hard to put away. He's been knocked out 4 times, but he's another one of these guys that doesn't really go unconscious. He kind of gets waved off. He got knocked out by Mark Hunt. That was all the way in the 4th round after just being exhausted and not being able to continue. He got submitted by Daniel Cormier, and that's kind of where I see maybe this taking place. Maybe Curtis Blaydes actually submits somebody instead of TKOing them because Derrick Lewis is just so hard to get out of there. What I like here, it's chalky now. I tweeted it out earlier, the over 1.5, James. I think Blaydes takes his time. I think he drags Derrick Lewis into the late rounds and then he puts him away. And you best believe I will be sprinkling the rounds 3, 4, and 5 props on Curtis Blaydes, because I think Derrick Lewis will hang in there, and I think Blaydes will take his time. And it'll be because Derrick Lewis is tired of being on his back that he finally caves and allows Curtis Blaydes to get a dominant position where he can finish and get the fight waved off. I don't see anything besides a banana peel slip for Blaydes for Derrick Lewis to win this. I mean, if you want a puncher's chance, he's got a puncher's chance, but that's all he's got here.
I agree. And one more thing that kind of ties to what you're saying about the Ngannou loss is I see a lot of people when they see Curtis Blaydes and they see him doing interviews, they talk about his speech, right? And people say that, oh, he's got CTE and all this stuff. I did an interview with Curtis Blaydes back in 2016. Okay. You can find it on my channel, youtube.com/LynchOnSports. It was before the Luis Cortez fight for RFA. He's stuttering in that. He's always had a stutter. So people get that confused with thinking he's got CTE because of the Ngannou fight. Oh my God, Ngannou put him into another dimension. I'm glad you brought that up about the TKO things, because he was still, like you said, he wasn't a clean, like unconscious knockout. He got hit, he lost the fight, but that's something that's there's two false narratives about Curtis Blaydes. Number one, that he's a boring fighter. Number two is that he has CTE. Like, come on, people, go do your research. Go look at that interview. He's stuttering in that interview, and he hadn't had a single loss at that point. So just wanted to mention that as well, because I think that there's a lot of people there have the wrong idea. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to be Curtis's boy or anything, but I see a lot of people saying like, oh, he's got CTE. It's not the case. So, and yeah, I totally agree with your assessment there.
That's a great point. That's a fantastic point, and people need to know that for sure. He's got a speech impediment. It's definitely not something tied to, a war or something like that in the octagon. And he's highly intelligent. If you listen to how this guy talks, he knows what he's doing. And betting on smart fighters is something that I really like to take advantage of. He knows exactly what he's doing in there. He knows exactly what his path to victory is inside the cage. And because of that, I think he's one of the best fighters you can possibly put your money on, because until he fights Francis Ngannou, he's gonna find a way to win. I like Curtis Blaydes here. I like him a lot. I like that over 1.5. I might even like the over 2.5 if that's where this thing goes, because the over 1.5 opened up about -135. If you got in early, you're lucky. It's about -170 now. They might move that thing to a 2.5, and I'd be tempted to take that as well. But I think Curtis Blaydes probably finishes this fight in the 4th round. And we talked about the gas tanks. Curtis Blaydes uses his gas tank as a weapon, James. He is more than willing to go 25 minutes. Derrick Lewis is not. Derrick Lewis can go 15. Derrick Lewis struggles in the 3rd round. He's not going 20. He's not going 25. He just doesn't have it in him. So I see a late finish for Curtis Blaydes. That's my parlay. That's my big bet for the week, is Ketlen Vieira tied to Curtis Blaydes. And I think that's a spot that I just love. It comes out to about -140 now. I got in a little bit early. I think I got -133. So it should be -140, -145. So you got to lay a little bit of chalk. But honestly, it's one of those spots where I see very limited opportunity for the opponents to crack that one.
I like it. I dig it for sure. Might even do that one myself. So
there you go. James, before we wrap this bad boy up, is there anything that you want to shout out? The floor is yours, my friend. We appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us tonight. Tell the people where they can find you and what you've got on the back burner.
Well, first off, I love doing this show. I know the fans love this, our combo together. So thanks for having me on, man. I seriously love doing this. It's a long podcast. I always got to negotiate with the wife and make sure I can take the time, because, I'm cutting into dinner time and dad time. But honestly, I'm willing to make the sacrifice because I love doing this show. I love hearing your insight. You do a great show, and I love the positivity. And, like I've told you many times, just ignore all those haters, man, because you do fantastic work. A lot of people wish they could be doing what you're doing. Your audience can get a hold of me, Twitter, Instagram, at Lynch on Sports, YouTube. That's where I put all my content. So I work for like 12 outlets, guys. So you'll notice my interviews are everywhere. But what I do is I put them all in playlists on my YouTube channel. So you guys can go there, subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. And if you look under that UFC interviews playlist, or in this case for this weekend, the UFC Vegas 19 playlist, you'll see 18 interviews. Along with the 18 interviews, I got my own preview of this card in case you wanted to go look at that. Also, I got pros picks. You guys know I do those videos. I got pros picks for Blaydes and Lewis. I got a bunch of fighters giving their picks on the fight. Some of them are from the first fight that was scheduled, but I don't think much has changed since then. It's not like either of them have fought anyone. So 2 of those videos are from the original fight. And then I got a more recent one, got picks from like Aljamain Sterling and some of the other fighters, just to get some insight. Again, it's an opinion video. It's not an experts panel or anything like that, but I know you guys enjoyed that content as well. And most importantly, man, thanks for having me on. This was awesome. Love doing this show, man. I really appreciate it.
James, absolute blast. Thank you for your kind words, my friend. And that's one of the reasons why we love you so much, is your positivity that you bring to the podcast as well. You fit right in here at the Diehard MMA podcast. So thank you. We will get talking and definitely do this soon. So appreciate your time. And for everybody out there, last time I got a little confident, a little cocky. We were coming off the best night of my betting life, so I kind of ended on a hot note. But y'all know I love to spread the love and the good vibes, and I just want to leave you with a better thought this week. There's a lot of people out there that are still struggling. Things are starting to get better in the world. Things are starting to come around, and we're seeing a little bit of normalcy. But you just hang on to those good influences, especially if you're on Twitter. Make sure you are quick on the trigger finger with the mute and the block button. You do not need negative influences in your life. There's just not enough time. Surround yourself with people who are positive, people who are going to lift you up and be the wind in your sails. Those are the people that you need, and your life will be exponentially better for it. And in turn, don't be the troll. Don't be the person dragging somebody down because you had a bad day. Be the light for other people. You can make someone else's day just by checking in with them, just by giving them a little bit of a compliment, just by giving them a nice comment on maybe something that they tweeted or an article that they righted. Be that person for somebody else, and people will start to be that for you. Spread the love, everybody. Good luck on all your degenerate action this week. I'll be back later on for Total Madness. Of course, the undefeated post-weigh-in show on Friday, and then we've got Fight Saturday. It's good times. We're lucky to be where we're at. You all have a great week, and let's roll.